The screaming birth of She Who Thirsts marked the end of an empire that had ruled the galaxy for millions of years. When Slaanesh erupted into existence during the 30th millennium, the psychic shockwave tore through the Eldar race with devastating finality. Entire craftworlds were consumed in an instant, their population's souls devoured by the newborn chaos god. The Eldar homeworlds in the galactic core became the Eye of Terror, a roiling mass of warp energy that would forever serve as Slaanesh's domain. Yet not all of the ancient race perished in that cataclysmic moment. Deep within the labyrinthine passages of the webway, scattered groups of Eldar survivors found themselves cut off from their dying civilization. These refugees had been engaged in various activities when the fall occurred. Some were traders using the ancient network of tunnels, others were explorers mapping forgotten routes, and many were simply traveling between the great port cities that served as waypoints throughout the webway's vast expanse. Among these port cities, none was more significant than Commorragh. Originally constructed as a trading hub during the height of Eldar civilization, Commorragh had served as a nexus point where dozens of webway portals converged. Its architecture reflected the pinnacle of Eldar engineering, with soaring spires that defied conventional physics and platforms that hung suspended in the interdimensional space between realms. The city's original inhabitants had been merchants, diplomats, and various functionaries who maintained the flow of goods and information throughout the empire. When the fall came, these survivors found themselves trapped but protected within the webway's confines, shielded from Slaanesh's immediate hunger by the ancient barriers that separated the tunnel network from the warp. The initial years following the fall were chaotic and desperate. The survivors in Commorragh faced immediate challenges that would reshape their entire society. Cut off from the psychic network that had sustained Eldar civilization, they discovered that their souls were slowly being drained by She Who Thirsts despite the webway's protection. The barriers were not absolute, they merely delayed the inevitable consumption. Traditional Eldar society, built around the path system that channeled and controlled their intense emotions, collapsed as survivors realized that their old ways of life were no longer sustainable. It was during this period of upheaval that the first proto-cabals began to form. These were initially loose confederations of survivors who banded together for protection and resources. The strongest among them were those who had already embraced the darker aspects of Eldar nature before the fall: pirates, outcasts, and those who had rejected the path system. They quickly discovered that acts of cruelty, torture, and the infliction of pain could temporarily satiate their souls and provide protection from Slaanesh's hunger. This revelation fundamentally altered the trajectory of Commorragh's development. Among the various factions that emerged in the early post-fall period, none would prove more significant than the group that coalesced around a former slave named Asdrubal Vecht. Unlike many of the survivors who had been merchants or nobles, Vecht came from the lowest rungs of pre-fall Eldar society. He had been born into bondage, serving various masters in the outer districts of Commorragh before the catastrophe struck. This background, which should have been a disadvantage, instead provided him with crucial insights into the city's infrastructure and the weaknesses of its ruling class. Vecht's rise began in the immediate aftermath of the fall, when traditional authority structures had broken down but had not yet been replaced by new hierarchies. He understood that the old noble houses, despite their initial advantages in terms of resources and followers, were fundamentally unprepared for the new reality of Commorragh. They continued to operate according to pre-fall social conventions, attempting to maintain their status through inherited privilege rather than adapting to the brutal meritocracy that was emerging. The transformation of Vecht from slave to leader was neither swift nor easy. He began by gathering other low-born survivors who had been overlooked by the emerging noble factions. These included former servants, maintenance workers, and various outcasts who possessed detailed knowledge of Commorragh's hidden passages and forgotten sectors. Vecht recognized that information and mobility would be more valuable than traditional wealth in the new order, and he systematically mapped the city's vulnerabilities, while his rivals focused on securing obvious strongholds. The establishment of what would become the first true cabal structure emerged from Vecht's understanding that the old Eldar concepts of honor and nobility were not only obsolete, but actively harmful in their new environment. He created an organization based purely on effectiveness and results, where advancement came through demonstrating superior cunning, cruelty, and success in raids rather than through bloodline or inherited position. This meritocratic brutality attracted followers who had been marginalized under the previous system, but possessed the skills necessary for survival in post-fall Camorra. Vect's early cabal differed significantly from the noble houses that still dominated much of the city, where the houses maintained elaborate courts and focused on internal politics. Vect's organization was streamlined for external action. They developed new techniques for raiding through the webway portals, targeting not only other survivors within Camorra, but also venturing into real space to capture slaves and resources from younger races. These raids served multiple purposes. They provided the sustenance needed to keep Slaanesh at bay, they brought invaluable resources, and they demonstrated the effectiveness of Vect's methods to potential recruits. The transformation of Camorra from a trading port into the Dark City was not accomplished through a single conquest, but rather through a series of expansions and consolidations that occurred over several millennia. As Vect's influence grew, he began incorporating other sections of the webway into his domain. Many of these areas had been abandoned or only lightly populated before the fall, but they contained valuable infrastructure that could be repurposed for the city's new role as a base for piratical operations. The expansion process involved both military conquest and more subtle forms of manipulation. Vect demonstrated a remarkable ability to exploit the weaknesses of rival factions, often turning them against each other rather than confronting them directly. He would provide information to one noble house about another's vulnerabilities, supply weapons to rebels within a rival's territory, or simply wait for internal conflicts to weaken his enemies before moving to absorb their resources. This approach allowed him to grow stronger while his rivals grew weaker, all while maintaining the appearance of being merely one faction among many rather than a direct threat to the established order. The physical transformation of Camorra during this period was dramatic. New districts were carved out of the interdimensional space, connected by bridges and platforms that defied conventional physics. The architecture began to reflect the changing nature of its inhabitants, with the elegant curves and organic forms of traditional Eldar construction giving way to more angular and predatory designs. Arenas were constructed for gladiatorial combat, slave pens were expanded to accommodate the growing number of captives, and torture chambers were integrated into the very foundations of the city's infrastructure. The consolidation of power among the Drukhari noble houses during this period established patterns that would persist for millennia. The houses that survived and thrived were those that successfully adapted to the new paradigm of constant raiding and internal competition. They abandoned the contemplative aspects of traditional Eldar culture in favor of an existence focused entirely on the pursuit of sensation and the infliction of suffering. The path system was not merely abandoned, but actively rejected, replaced by a philosophy that embraced excess and cruelty as necessary for survival. Early Cabal warfare was characterized by its complexity and the multiple levels on which it was conducted. Physical combat was only one aspect of the conflicts that raged throughout Camorra. Political manipulation, economic warfare, and psychological operations were equally important. A successful Archon needed to master not only the arts of war, but also the subtleties of negotiation, betrayal, and alliance building. The most effective leaders were those who could simultaneously conduct military campaigns against external targets while managing the intricate web of relationships and rivalries within the Dark City itself. The weapons and tactics employed during this period reflected the unique environment of Camorra and the webway. Traditional Eldar technology was modified and enhanced to serve the new purposes of raiding and slave-taking. Splinter weapons were developed to cause maximum pain while keeping victims alive for capture. Vehicles were redesigned for speed and intimidation rather than the elegant efficiency that had characterized pre-fall Eldar engineering. The focus shifted from protection and sustainability to aggression and the projection of terror. The establishment of the arena culture that would become central to Drukhari society began during this foundational period. The arenas served multiple functions beyond mere entertainment. They provided a venue for settling disputes between cabals without resorting to full-scale warfare. They offered opportunities for ambitious individuals to demonstrate their skills and attract the attention of powerful patrons, and they supplied a constant source of suffering that helped sustain the city's population against Slaaneş's hunger. The slave trade, which would become the economic foundation of Camorra, developed organically from the early raiding activities. Initially, captives were taken primarily for their psychic energy and the suffering they could provide. However, the practical value of slave labor in expanding and maintaining the growing city quickly became apparent. Different types of slaves commanded different values. Psykers were prized for their ability to power various technologies and rituals. Skilled artisans could be forced to create weapons and equipment, and ordinary humans served as both laborers and sources of entertainment. The relationship between the emerging cabals and the other factions within Camorra was complex and constantly shifting. The homunculus covens, which had also survived the fall, provided essential services in terms of pain amplification and life extension, but maintained their independence through their monopoly on these crucial technologies. The witch cults offered spectacle and served as neutral ground for negotiations between rival factions, while various mercenary groups and independent operators filled the gaps in the emerging power structure. Vex's genius lay not in his ability to dominate these various factions directly, but in his understanding of how to position himself as indispensable to the functioning of the system as a whole. He became the broker of deals between rival houses, the coordinator of major raids that required multiple cabals to work together, and the arbiter of disputes when direct warfare would be too costly for all involved parties. This role allowed him to accumulate power and influence without triggering the kind of coordinated opposition that might have destroyed a more overtly aggressive leader. The technological development that occurred during the early period of the Dark City's existence was driven by practical necessity rather than scientific curiosity. The Drukhari needed weapons that could capture rather than kill, vehicles that could navigate the treacherous passages of the webway, and equipment that could function in the interdimensional environment of Camorra itself. This led to innovations in areas such as neural control systems, pain amplification devices, and portal technology that would give the Drukhari significant advantages in their raids against real space civilizations. The organizational structure that emerged from Camorra's foundational chaos represented a fundamental departure from traditional Eldar hierarchy, where the pre-fall civilization had relied on the path system to channel individual ambitions toward collective goals. The cabals developed a ruthlessly efficient pyramid of power built entirely on personal advancement through betrayal and violence. At the apex of this structure sits the Archon, a position that represents the ultimate achievement of Drukhari society, the successful culmination of countless acts of treachery, murder, and political manipulation. An Archon's authority extends far beyond simple military command. These individuals have demonstrated their superiority, not merely through combat prowess, though that remains essential, but through their ability to navigate the labyrinthine politics of Camorra, while simultaneously conducting successful raids into real space. The typical Archon maintains power through a carefully balanced combination of fear, respect, and calculated generosity. They must be strong enough to crush any direct challenge to their authority, clever enough to anticipate and counter political maneuvering from subordinates, and successful enough in their raiding activities to keep their followers supplied with slaves, weapons, and the psychic sustenance necessary for survival. The physical presence of an Archon reflects their elevated status within Drukhari society. These figures typically adorn themselves with the finest equipment their cabal can provide, power armor crafted from the most exotic materials, weapons that represent the pinnacle of Dark Eldar technology, and various trophies taken from particularly significant victories. Many Archons bear visible modifications courtesy of homunculus allies, enhancements that serve both practical and psychological purposes. Elongated limbs might provide advantages in combat, while more exotic alterations demonstrate the Archon's connections to the flesh-crafting covens and their willingness to embrace transformation in pursuit of power. The relationship between an Archon and their immediate subordinates forms the most volatile aspect of Cabal politics. Drakons serve as the Archon's lieutenants, commanding significant portions of the Cabal's military strength, while simultaneously representing the greatest internal threat to their leader's continued survival. Every Drakon understands that their position is both a privilege and a test. They must demonstrate loyalty and competence to maintain their status, while also positioning themselves to potentially succeed their Archon should the opportunity arise. This dynamic creates a complex web of relationships within the upper echelons of Cabal hierarchy. Drakons must balance their ambitions against the practical necessity of keeping their Cabal functional and successful. A Drakon who moves too quickly against their Archon risks not only personal destruction, but also the fragmentation of the entire organization, which would leave them with nothing to rule. Conversely, a Drakon who appears too content with their subordinate position may find themselves replaced by more ambitious rivals, or eliminated as a potential threat despite their apparent loyalty. The selection and promotion of Drakons reveals much about an Archon's leadership style and strategic thinking. Some Archons prefer to elevate individuals whose skills complement their own weaknesses, creating a leadership team that covers all aspects of Cabal operations. Others deliberately choose Drakons whose strengths mirror their own, reasoning that redundancy in leadership capabilities provides better insurance against unexpected losses. The most paranoid Archons rotate their Drakons frequently, never allowing any single individual to build sufficient power base to pose a serious threat. Beneath the Drakons, the Sybarites represent the backbone of Cabal military structure. These squad leaders have proven themselves through combat effectiveness and tactical acumen, earning the right to command groups of Cabalite warriors in battle. The position of Sybarite is often the first real taste of authority that ambitious Drukhari experience, and it serves as a crucial testing ground for those who aspire to higher ranks within the organization. A Sybarite must demonstrate not only personal combat skills, but also the ability to inspire fear and loyalty in their subordinates while maintaining discipline during the chaos of battle. The relationship between Sybarites and their warriors differs significantly from the political maneuvering that characterizes interactions between Drakons and Archons. At this level, competence in combat and raiding operations takes precedence over pure political cunning, though the latter remains important for advancement. Sybarites who consistently lead successful missions and bring back valuable prizes find themselves with opportunities for promotion, while those who fail face demotion, exile, or death, depending on the severity of their failures and their Archon's disposition. Cabalite warriors form the foundation upon which all Cabal power ultimately rests. These individuals have survived the brutal selection process that weeds out the weak and incompetent from Drukhari society, proving themselves worthy of bearing arms in service to their betters. The life of a Cabalite warrior is one of constant preparation for violence, punctuated by raids into real space that offer opportunities for advancement, enrichment, and the psychic sustenance necessary for survival. Their equipment reflects their status within the organization: splinter rifles that can inflict exquisite agony on their targets, armor that provides protection while maintaining the mobility essential for Drukhari combat tactics, and various specialized weapons suited to their particular roles within the Cabal's military structure. The rigid caste system that governs Cabal hierarchy extends beyond simple military ranks to encompass every aspect of organizational life. Advancement within this system requires not only demonstrating superior capability, but also eliminating or displacing those who currently occupy desired positions. This creates an environment of constant competition that serves to strengthen the organization by ensuring that only the most capable individuals rise to positions of authority, while simultaneously creating internal tensions that can be exploited by rival Cabals or other enemies. The integration of specialized units into Cabal structure represents one of the most complex aspects of Drukhari military organization. Incubi bodyguards occupy a unique position within this hierarchy, as they maintain their own warrior lodge traditions while serving individual archons or other high-ranking Cabal members. These elite warriors are not technically part of the Cabal's command structure, but their presence significantly affects the balance of power within the organization. An archon protected by incubi bodyguards is far more difficult to assassinate, which tends to discourage direct challenges to their authority while potentially encouraging more subtle forms of political maneuvering. The relationship between incubi and their employers is governed by ancient contracts that predate the formation of most current Cabals. These agreements specify the terms of service, payment expectations, and the circumstances under which the contract may be terminated. The incubi's reputation for absolute loyalty during the term of their service makes them invaluable to archons who face constant threats from ambitious subordinates, but their mercenary nature means that this protection is only as reliable as the archon's ability to meet their contractual obligations. Members of the Court of the Archon represent another category of specialized personnel whose integration into Cabal structure requires careful management. These individuals, including Lamians, Medusi, S-Slythe, and Gulls, bring unique capabilities that can significantly enhance a Cabal's effectiveness, but their alien nature and specialized skills place them outside the normal hierarchy. An Archon must balance the advantages these creatures provide against the potential complications their presence creates within the organization's power structure. Lamians, with their mastery of exotic poisons and drugs, serve both as weapons and as sources of the chemical enhancements that many Drukhari require to maintain their edge in combat. Their knowledge of toxicology makes them valuable allies, but also dangerous potential enemies, as they possess the means to eliminate their employers if properly motivated. Medusi brings psychic abilities that complement the Drukhari's own capabilities, while their horrific appearance serves to intimidate enemies and reinforce the Archon's reputation for consorting with dangerous entities. The integration of allied witch cults into Cabal operations represents one of the most delicate aspects of Drukhari inter-factional politics. These alliances are typically temporary arrangements focused on specific objectives, as the fundamental differences between Cabal and cult philosophies make long-term cooperation difficult. Cabals approach warfare with calculated brutality designed to achieve specific strategic objectives, while witch cults are primarily motivated by the pursuit of perfect combat and the aesthetic appreciation of violence. When witch cults do ally with Cabals for major operations, the integration of their forces requires careful coordination to prevent conflicts between the different organizational cultures. Witches operate according to their own hierarchy and traditions, which may not align with Cabal command structures. Successful joint operations typically involve clearly defined roles for each faction, with Cabals handling the strategic planning and logistics, while cults focus on the aspects of the mission that allow them to demonstrate their combat artistry. Resource management within a Cabal extends far beyond the simple accumulation of wealth or weapons. The procurement and maintenance of slave populations represents one of the most critical aspects of Cabal operations, as these captives serve multiple essential functions within Drukhari society. Slaves provide the labor necessary to maintain Comora's infrastructure, serve as subjects for the torture that sustains Drukhari souls against Slaanesh's hunger, and represent a form of currency that can be traded with other factions for goods and services. The logistics of slave procurement require careful planning and significant resources. Successful raids into real space demand detailed intelligence about target populations, coordination between multiple Cabal units, and the specialized equipment necessary to capture large numbers of victims while minimizing casualties among the raiders themselves. The transportation of slaves back to Comora through webway portals presents additional challenges, as the interdimensional tunnels were not originally designed to accommodate large-scale population transfers. Once slaves arrive in Comora, their management becomes an ongoing concern that affects every aspect of Cabal operations. Different types of captives require different handling. Psykers must be contained with specialized equipment to prevent them from using their abilities to escape or cause damage, while skilled artisans need to be kept in sufficient health to continue producing valuable goods. The distribution of slaves within the Cabal hierarchy serves as both a reward system for successful raiders and a means of maintaining the complex web of obligations and dependencies that holds the organization together. Weapon manufacturing represents another crucial aspect of Cabal resource management, as the specialized equipment required for Drukhari warfare cannot be obtained through simple trade or conquest. The production of splinter weapons, for example, requires not only advanced manufacturing facilities, but also access to the exotic materials and technologies that give these weapons their distinctive properties. Many Cabals maintain their own weapon shops staffed by enslaved artisans and overseen by Drukhari specialists who understand the intricate requirements of their faction's preferred armaments. The territorial control that Cabals exercise within Comora's various districts forms the foundation of their power and influence within the broader Dark City. These territories are not merely administrative divisions, but represent carefully defended strongholds that serve as bases for raiding operations, storage facilities for accumulated wealth, and symbols of the Cabal's status within Drukhari society. The size and quality of a Cabal's territorial holdings directly correlate with their ability to conduct successful operations and attract new recruits. Competition for desirable territory within Comora creates another layer of conflict that Cabals must navigate while pursuing their external objectives. The most valuable districts offer advantages such as proximity to major webway portals, access to essential infrastructure, or defensible positions that can be fortified against rival factions. Control of these areas often requires constant vigilance and the willingness to defend territorial claims through violence when necessary. The administration of Cabal territories requires a complex bureaucracy that extends far beyond the military hierarchy. Slave overseers, weapon technicians, portal operators, and various other specialists must be recruited, trained, and managed to keep the organization functioning effectively. This administrative apparatus represents both a source of strength and a potential vulnerability, as it creates additional positions that ambitious individuals might seek to exploit for personal advancement, while also providing more opportunities for rival factions to infiltrate and sabotage Cabal operations. The transformation of a low-born slave into the supreme overlord of Comora represents perhaps the most extraordinary rise to power in the history of the Dark City. Asdrubal Vekt's ascension began in the most unlikely circumstances imaginable. Born into bondage in one of Comora's outer districts, he spent his early years performing menial labor for various minor nobles who viewed him as nothing more than expendable property. This humble origin, rather than limiting his potential, provided him with crucial insights into the fundamental weaknesses of Comora's ruling class that would later prove instrumental in his conquest of the Dark City. Vekt's early experiences as a slave exposed him to aspects of Comora's infrastructure and social dynamics that remained invisible to the noble houses. He learned the locations of hidden passages that connected different districts, understood the supply chains that kept the city functioning, and observed the petty rivalries and personal weaknesses of his various masters. More importantly, he recognized that the traditional Drukhari nobility, despite their obvious advantages in terms of resources and followers, remained fundamentally unprepared for the kind of total warfare that would be necessary to truly dominate the Dark City. The initial phase of Vekt's rise involved the careful cultivation of a network of allies and informants drawn primarily from Comora's underclass. Former slaves, maintenance workers, dock laborers, and various other overlooked individuals possessed detailed knowledge of the city's vulnerabilities and hidden resources. Vekt systematically recruited these individuals, offering them opportunities for advancement that the established noble houses would never consider providing. This approach allowed him to build an intelligence network that penetrated every level of Comora society while remaining largely invisible to his future enemies. Unlike the noble houses that focused on maintaining their inherited territories and traditional power bases, Vekt understood that true control of Comora would require mastery of the city's connection to the broader webway network. He devoted considerable effort to mapping the portal systems that linked the Dark City to real space, identifying which routes were most suitable for large-scale raiding operations, and which could be used to bypass the defenses of rival cabals. This strategic thinking would later prove crucial when he began his campaign to eliminate the competition and consolidate power under his personal authority. The formation of what would eventually become the Cabal of the Black Heart began as a loose confederation of outcasts and ambitious individuals who shared Vec's vision of a new order in Camorra. The early membership included former slaves who had earned their freedom through various means, minor nobles who had been marginalized by the established houses, and skilled warriors who lacked the political connections necessary for advancement within traditional Cabal structures. Vect welded these diverse elements into a cohesive fighting force through a combination of shared purpose, careful resource management, and the promise of unprecedented opportunities for advancement. The organizational structure that Vect created for his emerging Cabal reflected his understanding that flexibility and adaptability would be more valuable than rigid adherence to traditional hierarchies. Rather than simply copying the command structures used by established noble houses, he developed a system that rewarded competence and results while maintaining the competitive internal dynamics that drove Drukhari society. Positions within the Black Heart were earned through demonstrated ability rather than inherited privilege, creating a meritocracy that attracted talented individuals from across Camorra's social spectrum. Vec's early military campaigns focused on targets that would provide maximum strategic advantage while minimizing the risk of triggering coordinated opposition from the established powers. He avoided direct confrontations with major noble houses, instead targeting their outlying territories and minor allies. These operations served multiple purposes. They provided his followers with combat experience and valuable resources, demonstrated the effectiveness of his tactical innovations, and gradually weakened the peripheral elements of rival power structures without immediately threatening their core interests. The tactical doctrines developed by the early Black Heart differed significantly from the approaches favored by traditional Drukhari nobility, where established cabals relied heavily on overwhelming force and direct assault tactics. Vect emphasized intelligence gathering, precise timing, and the exploitation of enemy weaknesses. His forces became specialists in infiltration, sabotage, and coordinated strikes that maximized psychological impact while minimizing their own casualties. These methods proved particularly effective against opponents who expected conventional Drukhari warfare and were unprepared for more sophisticated approaches. The expansion of Black Heart territory within Camorra required a combination of military conquest and political maneuvering that demonstrated Vec's mastery of both aspects of Drukhari power dynamics. Rather than simply seizing territory through brute force, he often orchestrated situations where rival factions would weaken each other through conflict, allowing him to move in and claim the spoils with minimal expenditure of his own resources. This approach required careful timing and extensive intelligence networks, but it allowed the Black Heart to grow stronger while their enemies grew weaker. One of Vec's most significant early victories involved the manipulation of Imperial forces to eliminate a rival cabal that had been challenging his expansion into a particular district of Camorra. Through carefully planted intelligence and the strategic placement of captured Imperial equipment, he convinced an Imperial Navy patrol that the rival cabal's stronghold contained a major chaos cult that posed a threat to nearby Imperial worlds. The resulting Imperial assault devastated the rival cabal's forces and infrastructure, leaving their territory vulnerable to Black Heart occupation while maintaining Vec's plausible deniability regarding the entire operation. This manipulation of Imperial forces established a pattern that Vect would refine and repeat throughout his rise to power. He demonstrated a remarkable ability to exploit the prejudices and assumptions of various real-space civilizations, using their own military resources to eliminate his enemies within Camorra. These operations required extensive preparation and careful coordination, as they involved creating convincing false intelligence, positioning assets to support the deception, and ensuring that the resulting conflicts would produce outcomes favorable to Black Heart interests. The subjugation of rival archons represented perhaps the most complex aspect of Vec's ascension, as these individuals possessed the resources and experience necessary to pose serious threats to his growing power. Rather than engaging in direct military confrontations that might result in costly victories, Vec typically employed more subtle approaches that undermined his rivals' authority and gradually isolated them from their support networks. He would identify and exploit personal rivalries within enemy cabals, provide covert support to ambitious subordinates who might challenge their leaders, and create situations where rival archons would be forced to make decisions that weakened their positions regardless of which option they chose. The elimination of Archon Kralach of the Cabal of the Severed Chain exemplified Vec's sophisticated approach to removing rivals. Rather than challenging Kralach directly, Vec orchestrated a series of raids that appeared to be conducted by the Severed Chain against several minor noble houses that were actually Black Heart allies operating under false colors. The resulting conflicts gradually drew Kralach into a multi-front war that depleted his resources and forced him to make increasingly desperate alliances with unreliable partners. When Kralach finally realized that he had been manipulated, his cabal was too weakened to resist the Black Heart forces that moved to claim his territory and remaining assets. Vec's relationship with the Homunculi Covens represented one of the most delicate aspects of his political maneuvering, as these ancient flesh crafters possessed capabilities that could significantly enhance or threaten his growing power. Rather than attempting to dominate the Covens directly, which would have been both difficult and counterproductive, he positioned himself as a valuable patron who could provide them with interesting subjects for their experiments, while also offering protection from rivals who might interfere with their work. This approach allowed him to access Homunculi services and support without triggering the kind of resistance that more aggressive leaders had encountered when dealing with the Covens. The strategic use of Homunculi allies provided Vec with several crucial advantages during his rise to power. Enhanced warriors created through flesh crafting techniques gave his forces capabilities that conventional Drukhari troops could not match, while the psychological impact of deploying obviously modified soldiers served to intimidate enemies and reinforce his reputation as a leader with access to exotic resources. Additionally, the intelligence networks maintained by various Homunculi provided him with information about the activities and vulnerabilities of rival factions throughout Camorra. Vec's manipulation of rival cabals often involved creating situations where they would be forced to compete with each other for resources or territory while he remained above the immediate conflict. He would provide different factions with conflicting intelligence about valuable targets, arrange for rival raiding parties to encounter each other in real space, or simply ensure that multiple cabals would attempt to claim the same prize simultaneously. These orchestrated conflicts served to weaken potential enemies while demonstrating the superior coordination and intelligence capabilities that set the Black Heart apart from their competitors. The establishment of the Black Heart's dominance over Camorra's most profitable districts required both military success and economic acumen. Vec understood that controlling the slave markets, weapon manufacturing facilities, and portal access points would provide his cabal with sustainable advantages that could not be easily challenged by rivals. He systematically targeted these strategic assets, often using indirect approaches that avoided triggering immediate retaliation while gradually consolidating control over the Dark City's economic infrastructure. The slave markets represented a particularly important target for Black Heart expansion, as control of these facilities would provide both direct revenue and significant influence over other cabals that depended on slave labor for their operations. Vec's approach to acquiring market control involved a combination of direct purchase, strategic alliances with key market operators, and the elimination of competitors who refused to accommodate Black Heart interests. By the time rival factions realized the extent of his market penetration, the Black Heart had achieved a level of economic influence that made direct challenges extremely costly. Portal control represented another crucial element of Vec's strategy for dominating Camorra. Access to reliable webway routes was essential for conducting successful raids into real space, and cabals that lost this access would quickly find themselves unable to compete effectively with better connected rivals. Vex systematically acquired influence over portal operators and maintenance crews, often through a combination of bribery, coercion, and the strategic placement of Black Heart personnel in key positions. This network of influence allowed him to facilitate his own cabal's operations while potentially disrupting those of his enemies. The political machinations that enabled Vex's rise required a level of strategic thinking that extended far beyond conventional military planning. He maintained detailed intelligence files on every significant figure in Camorra politics, tracking their relationships, weaknesses, ambitions, and potential vulnerabilities. This information allowed him to predict how various individuals would react to different situations, enabling him to orchestrate complex scenarios where multiple parties would act in ways that ultimately served Black Heart interests while believing they were pursuing their own agendas. Vex's use of plausible deniability became one of his most distinctive political tools, allowing him to eliminate enemies and expand his influence while maintaining the appearance of innocence or even cooperation with the very factions he was undermining. He would arrange for rival cabals to be attacked by what appeared to be external enemies, provide assistance to factions that were being weakened by conflicts he had secretly orchestrated, and position himself as a mediator in disputes that he had deliberately created. This approach required extraordinary attention to detail and careful coordination of multiple operations, but it allowed him to achieve his objectives without triggering the kind of coordinated opposition that might have stopped a more overtly aggressive leader. The transformation of the Black Heart from a minor faction into the dominant power in Camorra represented a fundamental shift in the balance of power within the Dark City. Vex's success demonstrated that traditional noble privilege was insufficient to maintain authority in the face of superior organization, strategic thinking, and tactical innovation. His rise inspired imitators throughout Camorra, while simultaneously establishing new standards for political and military competence that would reshape Drukhari society for millennia to come. The establishment of Vex's supremacy over Camorra did not eliminate the other major cabals that had emerged from the Dark City's foundational chaos. Instead, his consolidation of power created a new hierarchy where the most successful and adaptable organizations continued to operate as significant forces within the broader structure of Drukhari society. These great cabals, while acknowledging Vex's ultimate authority, maintained their own territories, specialized capabilities, and distinctive approaches to warfare that made them valuable assets in the Supreme Overlord's grand designs for the Dark City's expansion and dominance. Among the most prominent of these surviving organizations, the Cabal of the Flayed Skull has earned a reputation that extends far beyond Camorra's borders into the realms of real space civilizations that have encountered their lightning-fast raids. The Flayed Skull's approach to warfare emphasizes speed, precision, and the kind of aerial supremacy that can turn a conventional military engagement into a one-sided massacre before enemy forces have time to organize effective resistance. Their pilots represent some of the most skilled aerospace combatants in the galaxy, individuals who have spent centuries perfecting their mastery of the Raider and Venom transports that serve as the backbone of Drukhari mobile warfare. The origins of the Flayed Skull's specialization in rapid strike operations can be traced to their early territorial holdings within Camorra, which included several districts that provided direct access to major webway portals suitable for large-scale vehicle deployment. Unlike cabals that focused on infantry-based raids or relied heavily on slave labor for their operations, the Flayed Skull invested heavily in vehicle acquisition and pilot training, recognizing that superior mobility would provide decisive advantages in both real space raids and conflicts with rival Drukhari factions. This strategic focus required significant resources and long-term planning, as the maintenance of large vehicle fleets and the training of expert pilots demanded continuous investment in specialized facilities and personnel. The Flayed Skulls Ravager squadrons have become legendary throughout the sectors of real space that border major webway access points, where Imperial and other civilizations have learned to associate the distinctive silhouette of these heavily armed gunships with impending disaster. The Cabal's Ravagers differ from those employed by other Drukhari factions in both their armament configurations and the tactical doctrines that govern their deployment. Flayed Skull pilots favor weapon loadouts that maximize their ability to engage multiple target types during a single engagement, allowing their squadrons to eliminate enemy air defenses, destroy ground-based heavy weapons, and support infantry operations without requiring extensive coordination with other unit types. The training regimens employed by the Flayed Skull to produce their elite pilots involve a combination of combat experience, technical education, and survival challenges that would be considered extreme even by Drukhari standards. Prospective pilots must demonstrate not only exceptional reflexes and spatial awareness, but also the ability to maintain precise control of their vehicles while under extreme stress and in the face of overwhelming enemy fire. The Cabal maintains several specialized training facilities within their territories, including aerial combat arenas, where pilots can practice against both mechanical targets and live opponents in controlled environments that simulate the conditions they will encounter during actual raids. The Flayed Skull's approach to real space operations reflects their understanding that modern warfare increasingly depends on the ability to achieve local air superiority and exploit the psychological impact of aerial assault on ground-based defenders. Their typical raid deployment involves multiple waves of aircraft that arrive through carefully coordinated portal openings, allowing them to achieve numerical superiority in specific engagement zones, while maintaining the mobility necessary to withdraw before enemy reinforcements can arrive. This tactical approach requires extensive intelligence gathering and precise timing, as the success of the entire operation depends on the raiders' ability to complete their objectives and extract their forces before becoming engaged in prolonged combat that might favor better equipped enemy forces. The reputation of Flayed Skull pilots extends beyond simple technical competence to encompass their willingness to attempt maneuvers and engage in combat situations that other Drukhari would consider suicidal. Their aircraft often bear elaborate kill markings and trophy displays that commemorate particularly spectacular victories or demonstrate the pilot's survival of seemingly impossible odds. These decorations serve both practical and psychological purposes. They provide enemy forces with clear evidence of the pilot's experience and capabilities, while also reinforcing the Drukhari emphasis on individual achievement and the pursuit of ever greater challenges. The Cabal of the Obsidian Rose represents a fundamentally different approach to Drukhari warfare, one that emphasizes meticulous planning, flawless execution, and the kind of tactical precision that transforms military operations into deadly works of art. Where other Cabals might rely on overwhelming force or superior technology to achieve their objectives, the Obsidian Rose has built its reputation on the ability to identify the optimal solution to any military challenge and execute that solution with a level of coordination and timing that leaves no room for enemy countermeasures or unexpected complications. The perfectionist philosophy that defines Obsidian Rose operations extends to every aspect of their organizational culture, from the selection and training of new recruits to the maintenance of their equipment and the planning of their raids. Members of this Cabal are expected to demonstrate not only competence in their assigned roles, but also a commitment to continuous improvement and the pursuit of tactical excellence that goes beyond simple effectiveness. This creates an internal culture that values innovation and creative problem solving, while maintaining the discipline necessary for complex multi-unit operations that require precise coordination between different elements of the Cabal's forces. The tactical doctrines employed by the Obsidian Rose reflect their understanding that successful military operations depend as much on careful preparation and intelligence gathering as on the capabilities of individual warriors or the quality of their equipment. Their planning processes involve detailed analysis of target capabilities, comprehensive assessment of potential complications or unexpected developments, and the creation of contingency plans that allow their forces to adapt to changing circumstances without losing overall operational coherence. This approach requires significant time and resource investment in the pre-operational phase, but it produces results that consistently exceed what might be expected from forces of comparable size and equipment. Obsidian Rose warriors are distinguished by their exceptional discipline and the precision with which they execute even routine military maneuvers. Their formations move with a coordination that appears almost choreographed, with individual squad members maintaining exact positioning and timing that allows the unit to function as a single organism rather than a collection of separate combatants. This level of coordination requires extensive training and constant practice, as the complex maneuvers favored by the Obsidian Rose depend on each warrior's ability to anticipate and respond to the actions of their teammates without requiring explicit communication or direction. The equipment employed by Obsidian Rose forces reflects their emphasis on precision and reliability over raw destructive power. Their weapons are maintained to specifications that exceed standard Drukhari military requirements, with individual warriors often spending considerable time customizing their armaments to achieve optimal performance characteristics for their specific combat roles. This attention to detail extends to their vehicles and support equipment, which undergo regular maintenance and modification to ensure that mechanical failures or performance limitations do not compromise the execution of carefully planned operations. The Obsidian Rose approach to real space raids involves extensive preliminary reconnaissance and intelligence gathering that allows their forces to identify the most efficient methods for achieving their objectives while minimizing exposure to enemy countermeasures. Their operations typically unfold according to precisely timed sequences that coordinate the actions of multiple units to create cascading effects that overwhelm enemy defenses through superior positioning and timing rather than brute force. This tactical approach requires commanders who can maintain awareness of complex, rapidly evolving situations while making the split-second decisions necessary to exploit emerging opportunities or counter unexpected threats. The cabal of the Poisoned Tongue has achieved notoriety throughout the galaxy for their mastery of toxins, biological warfare, and assassination techniques that can eliminate specific targets while leaving surrounding populations largely unharmed. Their approach to warfare emphasizes subtlety and precision over the spectacular displays of violence favored by many other Drukhari factions, though their methods are no less deadly for their apparent restraint. The Poisoned Tongue has developed capabilities that allow them to conduct operations that would be impossible for conventional military forces, eliminating key enemy leaders or disrupting critical infrastructure through methods that leave little evidence of Drukhari involvement. The toxic arsenal employed by the Poisoned Tongue includes both traditional Drukhari splinter weapons enhanced with exotic venoms and more specialized delivery systems designed for covert operations, where conventional weapons would be inappropriate or ineffective. Their weapon technicians have developed compounds that can be deployed through environmental systems, incorporated into food or water supplies, or delivered through seemingly innocuous contact with treated objects or surfaces. These capabilities allow Poisoned Tongue operatives to eliminate targets in situations where direct assault would be impossible, or where the political consequences of obvious Drukhari involvement would compromise broader strategic objectives. The recruitment and training processes employed by the Poisoned Tongue focus on identifying individuals with the patience, attention to detail, and psychological characteristics necessary for successful covert operations. Their operatives must be capable of maintaining cover identities for extended periods, while gathering intelligence and positioning themselves for precise strikes against designated targets. This requires not only technical competence in the use of specialized weapons and equipment, but also the ability to understand and manipulate the social dynamics of target populations without arousing suspicion or triggering security responses that might compromise ongoing operations. Poison tongue assassination techniques extend far beyond simple poisoning to encompass a comprehensive understanding of biological systems and the various methods by which living organisms can be disrupted or destroyed. Their operatives study the physiology of different species to identify optimal target points for their weapons, develop specialized toxins tailored to the specific biological characteristics of intended victims, and create delivery methods that can bypass conventional protective equipment or medical countermeasures. This scientific approach to assassination requires extensive research facilities and ongoing collaboration with homunculi allies who provide the technical expertise necessary for developing new compounds and delivery systems. The intelligence networks maintained by the Poison Tongue represent one of their most valuable assets, as successful covert operations depend on detailed knowledge of target populations, security arrangements, and the personal habits and vulnerabilities of specific individuals. Their agents often spend years infiltrating target organizations or communities, gradually building the relationships and access necessary for eventual strike operations, while gathering information that can be used to support other Drukhari activities. This long-term approach to intelligence gathering requires significant patience and resource investment, but it produces results that cannot be achieved through more conventional military operations. Among the lesser but still significant cabals that operate within Comora's complex political landscape, the Cabal of the Last Hatred has carved out a distinctive niche through their specialization in anti-imperial warfare and their particular expertise in countering the tactics and equipment employed by humanity's sprawling interstellar empire. Their focus on imperial targets reflects both strategic calculation and personal motivation, as many of their members have suffered losses in conflicts with imperial forces and view their raids against human worlds as opportunities for both profit and revenge. The Last Hatred's understanding of imperial military doctrine, equipment, and organizational structures exceeds that of most other Drukhari factions, as they have made the study of human warfare a central element of their tactical development. Their intelligence networks include agents who have spent decades observing imperial military installations, studying the training methods employed by different Imperial Guard regiments, and analyzing the capabilities and limitations of Imperial Navy vessels. This accumulated knowledge allows them to predict Imperial responses to different types of raids and develop countermeasures for the defensive strategies most commonly employed by human military commanders. The anti-imperial specialization of the Last Hatred extends to their equipment and tactical doctrines, which have been specifically adapted to exploit the weaknesses they have identified in imperial military systems. Their weapons loadouts favor armaments that are particularly effective against imperial armor and defensive positions, while their vehicle configurations emphasize the mobility and firepower necessary to overcome the numerical advantages that imperial forces typically enjoy. Their raiders have developed techniques for disrupting imperial command and control systems, neutralizing imperial air support, and exploiting the logistical vulnerabilities that affect all large-scale military operations. The psychological warfare techniques employed by the Last Hatred reflect their understanding of human psychology and the specific fears and cultural assumptions that can be exploited to maximize the terror impact of their raids. They have studied imperial propaganda, religious beliefs, and social structures to identify the most effective methods for creating panic and disrupting organized resistance. Their operations often include elements designed to exploit imperial superstitions or cultural taboos, creating psychological effects that persist long after the physical damage of their raids has been repaired. The systematic exploitation of real space populations represents the fundamental economic engine that sustains Comora's existence and prevents its inhabitants from falling prey to Slaanesh's eternal hunger. Every raid launched from the Dark City serves multiple interconnected purposes: the acquisition of slaves to fuel the city's labor demands, the procurement of exotic materials unavailable within the Webway's confines, and the generation of suffering necessary to satiate Drukhari souls against the predations of She Who Thirsts. The planning and execution of these operations requires a level of coordination and strategic thinking that transforms what might appear to be simple piracy into sophisticated military campaigns that can reshape the balance of power across entire star systems. The intelligence gathering phase that precedes any significant real space raid involves extensive reconnaissance operations that can span decades or even centuries of preparation. Drukhari scouts, often operating through carefully concealed webway portals, establish observation posts on target worlds where they monitor population movements, military deployments, industrial capabilities, and the countless other factors that determine a world's suitability for large-scale slave procurement. These advanced teams catalog the defensive installations that protect potential targets, identify the locations of the most valuable population centers, and map the transportation networks that enemy forces might use to respond to Drukhari incursions. The selection of raid targets reflects a complex calculus that weighs potential rewards against operational risks and resource requirements. Heavily fortified Imperial hive worlds might contain billions of potential slaves, but their defensive capabilities and the likelihood of rapid military response make them unsuitable for all but the most ambitious multi-cabal operations. Conversely, lightly defended agricultural worlds or frontier colonies might offer easier conquest, but provide insufficient population density to justify the resources required for large-scale portal deployment and slave transportation. The most attractive targets are typically worlds that combine significant population centers with limited defensive capabilities and geographic isolation that delays potential rescue operations. The procurement of exotic materials represents another crucial consideration in target selection, as Comora's industrial base requires constant supplies of rare elements and advanced technologies that cannot be synthesized within the Webway's artificial environment. Forge worlds controlled by the Adeptus Mechanicus contain vast stockpiles of advanced materials and manufacturing equipment, making them extremely valuable targets despite their formidable defenses. Mining worlds that extract rare minerals or energy sources provide different but equally important resources, while research facilities might contain prototype technologies or scientific data that could enhance Drukhari military capabilities. Portal deployment represents one of the most technically demanding aspects of real space raid operations, as the creation of stable webway connections to target locations requires precise calculations and specialized equipment that must function flawlessly under combat conditions. The Drukhari have developed portable portal generators that can create temporary access points large enough to accommodate raiding fleets, but these devices require careful positioning and significant power sources to maintain the dimensional barriers necessary for safe passage. The timing of portal activation must be coordinated with the arrival of raiding forces to minimize the exposure period during which enemy forces might detect and respond to the dimensional disturbance. The technical challenges associated with portal deployment become exponentially more complex when operations involve multiple simultaneous access points or require portals large enough to accommodate heavy vehicles and large numbers of personnel. The power requirements for maintaining multiple active portals constrain even the most advanced Drukhari energy systems, while the coordination necessary to synchronize the opening and closing of different access points demands split-second timing that leaves no margin for error. Failed portal operations can result in raiding forces being stranded in real space, or worse, dimensional instabilities that tear apart both the raiders and their intended targets. The deployment of fast skimmer craft through webway portals represents the tactical doctrine that has made Drukhari raids so devastatingly effective against conventional military forces. Raiders and Venoms emerge from dimensional rifts at maximum velocity, their pilots already locked onto predetermined targets and firing solutions calculated during the approach phase. The speed of these craft allows them to cover vast distances in the crucial seconds after portal emergence, reaching their objectives before enemy forces can organize coordinated resistance or bring heavy weapons to bear on the relatively fragile Drukhari vehicles. The psychological impact of sudden skimmer deployment cannot be overstated, as the appearance of alien aircraft from dimensional tiers creates panic and confusion that often proves more effective than the actual firepower of the attacking craft. Enemy commanders trained to respond to conventional threats find themselves facing an assault that bypasses their prepared defensive positions and strikes at targets they had considered secure from attack. The distinctive whine of Drukhari engines and the alien silhouettes of their craft create terror that spreads far beyond the immediate combat zone, disrupting communications and command structures across entire planetary defense networks. Raider crews represent the elite of Drukhari mobile warfare, individuals who have mastered the complex skills necessary to pilot their craft through dimensional portals while simultaneously engaging multiple enemy targets and coordinating with other elements of the raiding force. The open-top design of Raider transports requires pilots who can maintain precise control while exposed to enemy fire, environmental hazards, and the disorienting effects of rapid dimensional transitions. The most experienced pilots develop an intuitive understanding of their craft's capabilities that allows them to execute maneuvers that would be impossible for less skilled operators, threading their vehicles through defensive fire patterns while delivering their passenger loads to precise insertion points. The warrior squads transported by Raider craft must be prepared to disembark and engage enemy forces within seconds of portal emergence, as the success of most operations depends on achieving immediate tactical superiority before defenders can organize effective resistance. Kabalite warriors carried into battle aboard raiders undergo specialized training that prepares them for the disorientation and physical stress associated with rapid dimensional travel, while their equipment loadouts are optimized for the specific requirements of their assigned mission objectives. Squads designated for slave procurement carry restraint devices and non-lethal weapons designed to incapacitate rather than kill potential captives, while those assigned to eliminate specific targets or destroy infrastructure carry more conventional armaments. Venom squadrons provide close support and reconnaissance capabilities that complement the heavier firepower and transport capacity of Raider formations. These smaller, more agile craft excel at engaging enemy light vehicles and infantry formations, while providing the speed and maneuverability necessary to respond rapidly to changing tactical situations. Venom pilots often serve as the eyes and ears of larger raiding forces, using their craft's superior speed to scout ahead of main formations and provide early warning of enemy movements or unexpected defensive preparations. The coordination between different types of skimmer craft during real space operations requires a level of tactical sophistication that reflects the Drukhari's millennia of experience in mobile warfare. Mixed formations of Raiders and Venoms can engage multiple target types simultaneously while maintaining the flexibility necessary to respond to enemy countermeasures or exploit unexpected opportunities. The most successful raid commanders understand how to balance the different capabilities of their available craft to create combined arms effects that maximize the impact of their forces while minimizing exposure to enemy defensive fire. The extraction phase of real space raids presents unique challenges that require the same level of planning and coordination as the initial assault. Raiding forces must complete their objectives and return to their extraction points within precisely calculated timeframes, as prolonged exposure to enemy counterattacks can quickly overwhelm even the most capable Drukhari formations. The portable portal generators used to create extraction points are vulnerable to enemy fire and require constant protection from dedicated security teams, while the loading of captured slaves and materials must be accomplished under combat conditions that leave little room for careful handling or organization. Large-scale planetary assaults that involve multiple cabals working in coordination represent the most complex and ambitious operations conducted by Drukhari forces. These campaigns require extensive preliminary negotiations between participating factions to establish command structures, resource allocation, and the division of captured spoils. The natural competitiveness and mutual suspicion that characterizes relationships between different cabals makes such cooperation inherently unstable, requiring careful management and constant monitoring to prevent internal conflicts that might compromise the overall operation. The integration of witch cults into major planetary assault operations provides specialized capabilities that complement the tactical strengths of cabal forces while creating additional coordination challenges. Witch cult warriors excel in close-quarters combat and the kind of spectacular violence that maximizes psychological impact on enemy forces, but their emphasis on individual combat prowess and artistic expression can conflict with the disciplined unit tactics favored by most cabals. Successful joint operations typically involve clearly defined roles that allow each faction to contribute their particular strengths while minimizing opportunities for tactical conflicts or command disputes. Homunculus covens bring unique capabilities to large-scale assault operations through their mastery of pain amplification technologies and their ability to deploy specialized creatures that cannot be countered by conventional military responses. Pain engines and other coven constructs serve as psychological warfare tools that create terror effects far beyond their actual combat capabilities, while homunculi themselves provide medical support and torture expertise that enhances the value of captured slaves. The participation of coven forces in joint operations requires careful negotiation regarding the treatment of captives and the allocation of subjects for experimental purposes. The command structures established for multi-faction operations must balance the need for unified tactical direction against the political realities of Drukhari society, where no Archon willingly subordinates themselves to a rival's authority. Successful joint operations typically employ rotating command arrangements, where different faction leaders take responsibility for specific phases of the operation, or parallel command structures that allow each faction to maintain autonomy while coordinating their actions through liaison officers and shared intelligence networks. These arrangements require constant diplomatic management to prevent the personal rivalries and factional disputes that can undermine even the most carefully planned operations. The logistical requirements for planetary assault operations exceed those of smaller raids by several orders of magnitude, as the transportation and supply of large numbers of warriors, vehicles, and specialized equipment through webway portals demands extensive preparation and resource allocation. The establishment of forward bases within target systems requires the deployment of defensive forces and support personnel who can maintain portal operations and provide resupply capabilities for extended campaigns. These logistical networks become high-value targets for enemy counterattacks, requiring significant security resources that reduce the forces available for primary mission objectives. The economic necessity that drives constant raiding operations extends far beyond simple resource acquisition to encompass the fundamental requirements for Drukhari survival in their post-fall existence. The population of Camorra requires continuous influxes of fresh slaves to replace those consumed by the city's industrial operations, gladiatorial games, and the countless other activities that sustain Drukhari society. The rate of slave consumption within the Dark City means that even the most successful raids provide only temporary relief from the constant pressure to acquire new captives, creating a cycle of violence that must be maintained indefinitely to prevent societal collapse. The prevention of stagnation that might attract Slaanesh's attention represents an existential threat that shapes every aspect of Drukhari raiding strategy. Periods of reduced activity or failed operations create dangerous accumulations of psychic energy that draw the attention of She Who Thirsts, threatening not only individual Drukhari, but potentially the entire population of Camorra. This creates pressure for increasingly ambitious and spectacular raids that provide the levels of suffering and sensation necessary to maintain the psychic barriers that protect the Dark City from chaos corruption. The competition for raiding opportunities between different cabals creates additional layers of complexity in operational planning, as successful factions must balance their need for resources against the political consequences of appearing too dominant or threatening to their rivals. Cabals that achieve consistent success in their raiding operations face the challenge of managing their growing power and influence without triggering coordinated opposition from other factions that might view their success as a threat to the existing balance of power within Camorra. The technological advantages that enable successful real-space raids require constant innovation and development to counter the evolving defensive capabilities of target civilizations. Imperial forces, in particular, have adapted their tactics and equipment in response to repeated Drukhari attacks, developing new detection systems, rapid response protocols, and specialized weapons designed to counter the mobility advantages that have traditionally made Drukhari raids so effective. This technological arms race forces Drukhari weapon crafters and vehicle designers to continuously develop new capabilities and countermeasures that can maintain their tactical superiority against increasingly sophisticated opposition. The delicate equilibrium that maintains Camorra's existence depends not merely on successful raids against real-space civilizations, but on the intricate web of alliances, betrayals, and calculated violence that defines relationships between the Dark City's various factions. The politics of Camorra operate according to principles that would be incomprehensible to most civilizations, where trust is a liability, loyalty is temporary, and the only permanent relationships are those built on mutual fear and carefully balanced advantages. Within this environment, the cabals must navigate constant threats from both external enemies and internal rivals while maintaining the operational capabilities necessary for their continued survival. Inter-cabal warfare represents the most visible manifestation of Camorra's political dynamics, though these conflicts rarely involve the kind of total warfare that might threaten the Dark City's overall stability. Instead, cabal rivalries typically unfold through a series of calculated strikes, economic pressures, and proxy conflicts that allow factions to weaken their enemies while maintaining plausible deniability regarding their involvement. A successful Archon must master the art of conducting multiple simultaneous conflicts at different levels of intensity, engaging in open warfare with some rivals while maintaining profitable alliances with others, and secretly undermining the positions of potential future threats. The complexity of these relationships becomes apparent when examining the shifting alliances that characterize major cabal interactions. The Cabal of the Flayed Skull might maintain a formal non-aggression pact with the Obsidian Rose, while simultaneously conducting covert operations against Poisoned Tongue assets, all while negotiating with the Black Heart for access to premium slave markets. These arrangements can change rapidly based on evolving circumstances, successful operations that alter the balance of power, or simply the personal whims of individual Archons who decide that their current partnerships no longer serve their interests. Blood feuds between cabals often originate from seemingly minor incidents that escalate through cycles of retaliation and counter-retaliation until they become defining characteristics of the relationships between entire organizations. The destruction of a single raider during a joint operation might trigger reprisals that continue for centuries, with each faction seeking to inflict slightly greater damage than they received in the previous exchange. These ongoing conflicts serve multiple purposes within Drukhari society. They provide opportunities for warriors to gain combat experience and demonstrate their capabilities. They create the constant tension and violence that helps sustain the population against Slaanesh's hunger, and they prevent any single faction from becoming complacent or losing the edge that survival in Camorra demands. The management of these feuds requires careful calculation to ensure that they remain profitable rather than destructive. Archons must gauge the costs and benefits of continued conflict against the potential advantages of negotiated settlements or temporary truces. A feud that drains too many resources or prevents a cabal from conducting profitable real space raids becomes a liability that threatens the organization's survival, while conflicts that are resolved too easily might be interpreted as signs of weakness that invite challenges from other rivals. The most skilled Archons learn to manipulate their feuds to create opportunities for advancement while avoiding the kind of devastating losses that might permanently cripple their organizations. The role of neutral parties in mediating cabal conflicts has evolved into a specialized function within Comora's political landscape. Certain minor cabals or independent operators have built their reputations on their ability to facilitate negotiations between warring factions, providing secure meeting locations and reliable communication channels that allow enemies to explore potential agreements without appearing weak or desperate. These mediators must maintain careful neutrality to preserve their usefulness, as any perceived favoritism toward one faction would immediately compromise their ability to serve other clients and potentially make them targets for retaliation. The Archon's Court represents the most intimate and dangerous aspect of cabal politics, as these collections of advisors, bodyguards, and specialists operate within the inner circles of power, where personal relationships and individual loyalties can determine the fate of entire organizations. The composition of an Archon's Court reflects both their personal preferences and their strategic needs, balancing the requirement for trusted allies against the necessity of maintaining access to specialized capabilities that cannot be found within the cabal's regular membership. Lamians occupy a unique position within Archon courts through their mastery of exotic poisons and biochemical manipulation. These deadly courtesans serve as both weapons and advisors, providing their patrons with access to toxins that can eliminate enemies without leaving obvious evidence of foul play, while also offering insights into the weaknesses and vulnerabilities of rival leaders. The relationship between an Archon and their Lamian allies requires extraordinary trust, as these individuals possess the knowledge and means to eliminate their employers at any time. This mutual vulnerability creates bonds that can be stronger than conventional loyalty, as both parties understand that their survival depends on maintaining their partnership. The poisons employed by Lamians extend far beyond simple killing compounds to include substances that can manipulate emotions, alter memories, or induce specific psychological states in their victims. A skilled Lamian might dose an enemy negotiator with compounds that increase aggression and reduce rational thinking, causing them to make decisions that favor their opponent's position. Alternatively, they might employ toxins that create temporary paralysis or disorientation, allowing their allies to capture valuable prisoners or extract information from unwilling subjects. The versatility of these chemical weapons makes Lamians invaluable assets in the complex political maneuvering that characterizes Archon-level conflicts. Medusi brings psychic capabilities to Archon courts that complement the more conventional skills of other court members. These alien creatures possess mental powers that can penetrate the psychological defenses of most sentient species, providing their employers with intelligence-gathering capabilities that would be impossible to achieve through conventional means. The presence of a Medusa in an Archon's court serves as both a practical asset and a symbol of the leader's connections to exotic allies, demonstrating their ability to forge relationships with dangerous non-Drukari entities. The psychic abilities of Medusi make them particularly valuable during negotiations with other factions, as they can provide their employers with insights into the true intentions and emotional states of rival leaders. A Medusa might detect deception during diplomatic discussions, identify the specific fears or desires that motivate an opponent's behavior, or simply project an aura of menace that influences the psychological dynamics of important meetings. Their alien appearance and obvious psychic power create intimidation effects that can be as valuable as their actual capabilities in determining the outcomes of political confrontations. S-Slythe bodyguards represent the pinnacle of personal protection services available to Drukhari leaders, combining exceptional combat capabilities with the kind of absolute loyalty that can only be achieved through careful selection and conditioning. These four-armed serpentine warriors serve as both shields and weapons for their employers, capable of engaging multiple opponents simultaneously while maintaining constant awareness of potential threats from all directions. The presence of S-Slythe guards sends clear messages about an Archon's power and resources, as these elite warriors command premium prices and are available only to leaders who can afford their services. The combat techniques employed by S-Slythe bodyguards are specifically adapted to the close-quarters environments where assassination attempts are most likely to occur. Their multiple arms allow them to wield different weapon types simultaneously, engaging ranged threats with firearms while maintaining melee capabilities for opponents who close to striking distance. Their serpentine lower bodies provide exceptional mobility and stability, allowing them to move rapidly through confined spaces while maintaining defensive positions that protect their charges from multiple attack vectors. Urgulls bring a different type of protection to Archon courts through their savage ferocity and their ability to detect threats through senses that exceed those of most other species. These pale, eyeless creatures possess heightened awareness of their surroundings that allows them to identify potential assassins or hidden enemies that might escape the notice of more conventional guards. Their bestial appearance and obvious lethality create psychological effects that deter many potential threats, as few individuals are willing to risk confrontation with creatures that appear to exist solely for violence and destruction. The integration of Urgulls into court environments requires careful management, as their savage nature makes them unsuitable for situations that require subtlety or diplomatic consideration. However, their presence during high-stakes negotiations or potentially dangerous meetings serves as an unmistakable demonstration of an Archon's willingness to resort to extreme violence if their interests are threatened. The sight of Urgulls prowling the edges of diplomatic gatherings creates an atmosphere of barely controlled danger that can influence the behavior of all participants. Succession struggles within cabals represent perhaps the most dangerous aspect of Drukhari politics, as these conflicts directly threaten the leadership structures that maintain organizational coherence and operational effectiveness. The relationship between Archons and their Drakons is inherently unstable, as ambitious subordinates must balance their desire for advancement against the practical necessity of maintaining their current positions and the survival of their organization. This creates a constant state of tension where Drakons must demonstrate both loyalty and capability, while positioning themselves to potentially assume leadership if circumstances create opportunities for advancement. The methods employed by Drakons seeking to usurp their Archon masters reflect the sophisticated understanding of power dynamics that characterizes successful Drukhari leaders. Direct assassination, while occasionally successful, carries enormous risks and often results in the destruction of both the attacker and their target. More subtle approaches involve gradually undermining an Archon's authority through carefully orchestrated failures, strategic alliances with rival factions, or the manipulation of external threats that create opportunities for leadership changes without obvious internal betrayal. The timing of succession attempts requires extraordinary judgment, as premature moves result in the elimination of ambitious Drakons, while delayed action might allow rivals to seize opportunities that will not recur. Successful usurpers typically wait for moments when their Archon is weakened by external pressures, distracted by major operations, or facing challenges that require their attention elsewhere. The most sophisticated succession plots involve creating the very circumstances that provide opportunities for advancement, orchestrating situations where the current Archon's removal appears necessary for the survival of the organization rather than simple personal ambition. The aftermath of successful succession struggles often determines whether a cabal emerges stronger or weaker from the leadership transition. New Archons must quickly establish their authority over subordinates who might have supported their predecessors, eliminate potential rivals who pose threats to their consolidation of power, and demonstrate the competence necessary to maintain the organization's operational capabilities. The most successful transitions involve minimal disruption to ongoing operations and the rapid integration of former opponents into the new leadership structure, while failed successions can result in the fragmentation or complete destruction of entire cabals. Ancient noble houses within Camorra face unique challenges in maintaining their relevance within the power structure that Vect has created to dominate the Dark City. These organizations possess advantages in terms of accumulated wealth, established territorial holdings, and historical connections to other factions, but they must compete against newer cabals that may be more adaptable to current conditions and more willing to embrace the ruthless pragmatism that characterizes successful Drukhari politics. The tension between traditional privilege and demonstrated competence creates ongoing conflicts that shape the evolution of Camorra's political landscape. The strategies employed by noble houses to maintain their positions involve leveraging their historical advantages while adapting to the meritocratic aspects of Vect's new order. Established houses might use their wealth to recruit talented individuals from other factions, their territorial holdings to control access to essential resources, or their diplomatic connections to forge alliances that provide mutual protection against more aggressive rivals. However, these traditional approaches must be balanced against the need to demonstrate the kind of operational success that legitimizes continued authority within the current system. The influence of ancient bloodlines within noble house politics creates additional layers of complexity, as family relationships and inherited obligations can conflict with the practical requirements of organizational survival. Scions of noble houses might find themselves torn between loyalty to relatives who lack the competence necessary for leadership positions and the need to advance individuals whose capabilities better serve the organization's interests. These internal conflicts can be exploited by rival factions that understand how to manipulate family dynamics to create divisions within enemy organizations. The adaptation strategies employed by surviving noble houses reflect their understanding that pure traditionalism is insufficient for long-term survival in Vect's Camorra. The most successful houses have found ways to incorporate new members and innovative approaches while maintaining the cultural identity and organizational advantages that distinguish them from newer cabals. This balance between tradition and adaptation requires leadership that can navigate both the historical expectations of their own followers and the competitive pressures created by rival factions that may be less constrained by conventional limitations. The technological superiority that enables Drukhari dominance in real space raids stems from millennia of refinement in weapon systems specifically designed for their unique approach to warfare. Unlike the crude bludgeoning instruments favored by younger races, Drukhari armaments represent the pinnacle of sadistic engineering, where every component serves dual purposes of tactical effectiveness and the infliction of exquisite suffering. The weapons that emerge from Camorra's forges bear little resemblance to the elegant tools of their craftworld cousins, having been corrupted and enhanced to serve the darker appetites of their wielders, while maintaining the technological sophistication that marks all Eldar craftsmanship. Splinter weapons form the backbone of Drukhari small arms technology, utilizing crystalline ammunition that transforms conventional projectile warfare into an art form of prolonged agony. The Splinter rifle represents the standard armament for Cabalite warriors, its sleek profile concealing mechanisms of breathtaking complexity that accelerate razor-sharp crystal shards to velocities that can penetrate most conventional armor systems. The weapon's distinctive whine during discharge has become synonymous with Drukhari raids across countless worlds, a sound that triggers primal terror in populations that have survived previous encounters with the Dark City's forces. The crystalline ammunition employed by Splinter weapons undergoes extensive preparation before deployment, with each shard individually crafted and treated with toxins that ensure maximum suffering for any target that survives the initial impact. The crystals themselves are grown in specialized facilities within Camorra, where Drukhari artisans manipulate their molecular structure to achieve optimal fragmentation patterns and penetration characteristics. Upon impact, these projectiles shatter into microscopic fragments that spread throughout the victim's body, carrying their toxic payload to every organ system while creating wounds that resist conventional medical treatment. The toxins coating splinter ammunition represent some of the most sophisticated biochemical weapons in the galaxy, designed not merely to kill, but to induce specific types of suffering that provide maximum psychic sustenance for Drukhari souls. Different toxin formulations produce varying effects. Some cause immediate paralysis while maintaining full sensory awareness, allowing victims to experience every moment of their capture and subsequent torture. Others induce heightened pain sensitivity that amplifies even minor injuries into sources of overwhelming agony, while more exotic compounds can alter brain chemistry to produce terror, despair, or other emotional states that enhance the psychic energy generated by the victim's suffering. Splinter cannons represent the heavy weapon variant of this technology, scaling up the basic principles of crystalline projectile warfare to engage hardened targets and provide sustained fire support during major operations. These weapons utilize larger crystal formations that maintain their structural integrity over greater distances while carrying proportionally larger doses of toxic compounds. The increased size and velocity of splinter cannon ammunition allows it to penetrate vehicle armor and fortified positions that would resist smaller splinter rifle rounds, making these weapons essential for assault operations against well-defended targets. The feeding mechanisms of splinter cannons incorporate sophisticated ammunition handling systems that can cycle between different types of crystalline rounds based on target requirements. Anti-personnel rounds maximize fragmentation and toxin dispersal for engaging infantry formations, while armor-piercing variants sacrifice some toxic payload for enhanced penetration capabilities. The most feared variant employs crystal matrices that continue fragmenting after impact, creating expanding clouds of microscopic shards that can affect multiple targets simultaneously while making the immediate area hazardous for rescue operations. The psychological impact of splinter weapons extends far beyond their physical effects, as the distinctive visual and auditory signatures of these armaments create terror responses that often prove more tactically valuable than their actual lethality. The sight of crystal shards embedding themselves in armor and flesh, while victims collapse in obvious agony, creates panic that spreads throughout enemy formations, disrupting command structures and triggering flight responses that make organized resistance impossible. Experienced Drukhari warriors understand how to exploit these psychological effects, timing their attacks to maximize the terror impact on surviving enemies while positioning themselves to capture fleeing targets. Dark Lance technology represents the pinnacle of Drukhari heavy weapons development, utilizing principles of matter manipulation that border on the incomprehensible, even by the standards of advanced civilizations. These weapons generate focused beams of dark light energy that interact with matter at the subatomic level, causing targeted materials to simply cease existing rather than being destroyed through conventional means. The effect appears as a lance of absolute darkness that consumes everything in its path, leaving perfectly smooth voids where solid matter once existed without generating heat, radiation, or other secondary effects associated with conventional energy weapons. The dark light energy employed by these weapons draws its power from the same dimensional manipulation techniques that enable webway travel, tapping into the fundamental forces that separate real space from the warp to create zones where normal physical laws become temporarily suspended. The generation of dark light requires exotic materials and energy sources that can only be obtained through raids against technologically advanced civilizations, making dark lances expensive weapons that are typically reserved for elite units or critical missions, where their unique capabilities provide decisive advantages. The targeting systems integrated into Dark Lance weapons incorporate predictive algorithms that account for the complex physics involved in dark light projection, automatically calculating the optimal firing solutions for engaging targets at various ranges and under different environmental conditions. These systems must compensate for factors such as gravitational fields, electromagnetic interference, and the quantum fluctuations that affect dark light beam coherence over extended distances. The most advanced dark lance variants include adaptive targeting matrices that can modify beam characteristics in real time to counter enemy defensive measures or optimize effectiveness against specific target types. Blaster weapons utilize scaled-down versions of darklight technology to create personal weapons that provide Drukhari infantry with capabilities that exceed those available to most other military forces. These weapons generate shorter-range darklight pulses that can eliminate individual targets with absolute certainty while maintaining the energy efficiency necessary for sustained combat operations. The compact nature of blaster technology allows it to be incorporated into various weapon platforms, from handheld pistols carried by Archons to vehicle-mounted systems that provide close-range defensive capabilities. The tactical applications of darklight weapons extend beyond simple target elimination to include specialized roles such as breaching operations and defensive position clearance. Dark lances can create perfectly circular holes through fortified walls or vehicle armor without generating debris or structural damage that might complicate subsequent operations. This capability makes them invaluable for precision strikes against enemy strongpoints or for creating entry routes during assault operations where conventional explosives would be inappropriate or counterproductive. The maintenance requirements for darklight weapons demand specialized knowledge and equipment that only the most skilled Drukhari technicians possess. The exotic components that enable darklight generation are extremely sensitive to environmental conditions and require constant calibration to maintain optimal performance characteristics. Weapons that fall out of alignment can become unreliable or even dangerous to their operators, as unstable darklight emissions can affect unintended targets or create dimensional anomalies that threaten nearby personnel. Ghost plate armor represents the Drukhari approach to personal protection, emphasizing mobility and stealth over the crude durability favored by less sophisticated civilizations. This armor system utilizes advanced metamaterials that can selectively interact with different types of energy and projectiles, while maintaining the flexibility necessary for the acrobatic combat styles preferred by Drukhari warriors. The Ghost Plate's distinctive appearance, with its angular surfaces and deep shadows that seem to absorb light, serves both practical and psychological purposes in creating an intimidating presence that enhances the terror impact of Drukhari forces. The construction of Ghost Plate armor involves layering multiple types of protective materials, each optimized for specific threat types while contributing to the overall system's performance characteristics. The innermost layers consist of impact-absorbing compounds that distribute kinetic energy across the wearer's body, reducing the likelihood of serious injury from projectile impacts or blunt force trauma. Intermediate layers incorporate energy-dispersing elements that can deflect or redirect various types of directed energy weapons, while the outer surface includes adaptive camouflage systems that can modify their appearance to blend with surrounding environments. The mobility enhancements integrated into Ghost Plate systems allow Drukhari warriors to maintain their characteristic speed and agility while benefiting from significant protective capabilities. Powered assist mechanisms amplify the wearer's natural movements, enabling them to perform leaps and acrobatic maneuvers that would be impossible for unaugmented individuals. These systems draw power from compact energy cells that can operate for extended periods without requiring external recharging, though the most demanding combat situations may necessitate the use of supplementary power sources or temporary performance limitations. Combat drugs represent another crucial component of the Drukhari arsenal, providing chemical enhancements that can temporarily elevate warrior capabilities beyond their natural limits, while creating the heightened sensations that help sustain Drukhari souls against Slaanesh's hunger. These substances are typically administered through specialized delivery systems integrated into armor or weapon systems, allowing for precise dosing and timing that maximizes their beneficial effects while minimizing potential complications or dependency issues. The pharmacological sophistication of Drukhari combat drugs reflects millennia of research into the biochemical mechanisms that govern pain, pleasure, and performance enhancement. Different drug formulations are designed for specific tactical situations, stimulants that increase reaction times and movement speed for assault operations, analgesics that allow warriors to continue fighting despite severe injuries, and psychoactive compounds that enhance aggression and reduce fear responses during critical moments of combat. The most advanced formulations can provide multiple effects simultaneously while including safeguards that prevent overdose or dangerous interactions between different substances. Agonizer weapons epitomize the Drukhari philosophy of inflicting maximum suffering while maintaining tactical effectiveness, combining advanced energy field technology with traditional melee weapon designs to create instruments that can defeat any armor system, while ensuring that their victims experience unimaginable agony before death provides release. These weapons generate neural disruption fields that directly stimulate pain receptors throughout the target's nervous system, creating sensations that exceed the normal limits of biological pain tolerance, while simultaneously disrupting motor functions and cognitive processes. The energy fields produced by agonizer weapons can be modulated to achieve different effects based on the wielder's tactical requirements or personal preferences. Low-intensity settings might be used to incapacitate prisoners without causing permanent damage, while maximum power configurations can induce pain so intense that victims lose consciousness or suffer permanent neurological damage. The most skilled agonizer wielders learn to adjust their weapon settings during combat, using different intensities to control enemy behavior or extract information from captured opponents. The psychological warfare applications of agonizer weapons make them valuable tools for crowd control and intimidation operations, where the goal is to break enemy morale rather than simply eliminate opposition forces. The sight of comrades writhing in obvious agony from agonizer strikes creates panic that can cause entire enemy formations to break and flee, while the distinctive energy discharge patterns of these weapons serve as unmistakable warnings of Drukhari presence that can clear areas without requiring actual violence. Vehicle warfare represents the domain where Drukhari technological superiority becomes most apparent, as their skimmer craft combines speed, firepower, and maneuverability in configurations that conventional military forces find impossible to counter effectively. Raider transports exemplify this approach, utilizing anti-gravity systems that allow them to achieve remarkable velocities while maintaining the stability necessary for accurate weapons fire and precise troop deployment. The open-top design of these vehicles reflects Drukhari confidence in their superior reflexes and armor systems, while providing the visibility and firing angles that their crews require for maximum effectiveness. The anti-gravity technology that enables Raider performance draws power from the same energy systems that support other Drukhari equipment, creating integrated vehicle systems where propulsion, weapons, and defensive capabilities can share resources based on tactical requirements. During high-speed approaches, maximum power can be devoted to propulsion systems to achieve the velocities necessary for successful portal emergence and target engagement. Once combat is joined, power allocation can shift to weapons and defensive systems while maintaining sufficient propulsion capability for tactical maneuvering and extraction operations. Ravager gunships represent the heavy fire support variant of Drukhari skimmer technology, mounting multiple Dark Lance or disintegrator cannon systems on platforms that can deliver devastating firepower while maintaining the mobility necessary to avoid enemy countermeasures. These vehicles serve as the primary anti-armor assets for most Drukhari forces, capable of engaging enemy heavy vehicles, fortified positions, and aircraft with equal effectiveness. The combination of darklight weapons and high-speed platforms creates tactical capabilities that few enemy forces can match, as Ravagers can eliminate high-value targets and withdraw before enemy forces can organize effective responses. The crew requirements for Ravager operations reflect the complexity of coordinating multiple weapon systems while maintaining vehicle control under combat conditions. Ravager pilots must possess exceptional spatial awareness and reflexes to maintain optimal firing positions while avoiding enemy defensive fire, while gunners require the technical knowledge necessary to operate sophisticated targeting systems and the tactical understanding to prioritize targets effectively during rapidly evolving combat situations. The most experienced Ravager crews develop intuitive coordination that allows them to engage multiple targets simultaneously while maintaining the formation discipline necessary for effective squadron operations. Venom transports provide specialized capabilities that complement the heavier firepower and transport capacity of Raider squadrons, utilizing their superior speed and maneuverability to conduct reconnaissance missions, provide close support for infantry operations, and engage enemy light vehicles and aircraft. The compact size of Venom craft allows them to operate in environments where larger vehicles would be vulnerable or ineffective, while their advanced sensor systems provide the intelligence-gathering capabilities that enable successful Drukhari operations. The integration of different vehicle types into coherent tactical formations requires extensive training and coordination to achieve the combined arms effects that maximize Drukhari operational effectiveness. Mixed squadrons of Raiders, Ravagers, and Venoms can engage multiple target types simultaneously while maintaining the flexibility necessary to respond to changing tactical situations or exploit unexpected opportunities. The most successful vehicle formations operate according to carefully rehearsed tactical doctrines that assign specific roles and responsibilities to each vehicle type while maintaining the communication and coordination necessary for effective mutual support. The fundamental necessity that drives every aspect of Drukhari society stems from their precarious existence in the shadow of She Who Thirsts. Without the constant influx of psychic suffering generated by tortured captives, the souls of Comora's inhabitants would be slowly consumed by Slaanesh's eternal hunger, leaving them as empty husks devoid of consciousness or purpose. This existential threat transforms what might appear to be simple cruelty into a survival mechanism that permeates every level of Dark City society, from the lowliest Kabbalite warrior to the supreme overlord himself. The procurement, processing, and systematic exploitation of sentient beings represents the economic foundation upon which all Drukhari civilization rests, creating markets and industries that would be incomprehensible to more conventional civilizations. The psychic sustenance derived from suffering operates according to principles that the Drukhari have spent millennia studying and refining. Different types of pain generate varying levels of psychic energy, with physical torture providing baseline sustenance, while emotional and psychological anguish produces exponentially greater returns. The most valuable captives are those capable of experiencing complex emotions and sophisticated mental states, as their suffering can be amplified and prolonged through techniques that exploit their specific psychological vulnerabilities. Psychers represent the premium tier of this grotesque hierarchy, their enhanced mental capabilities allowing them to generate psychic energy at levels that can sustain multiple Drukhari for extended periods. The harvesting of psychic energy requires specialized facilities and equipment designed to capture and concentrate the emanations produced by tortured victims. Pain amplifiers developed by homunculus covens can magnify the suffering experienced by individual captives while simultaneously broadcasting their anguish throughout surrounding areas, allowing multiple Drukhari to benefit from a single victim's torment. These devices incorporate neural interface technology that directly stimulates pain receptors while preventing the psychological shutdown mechanisms that might otherwise limit the duration of effective torture sessions. The distribution networks that channel psychic energy throughout Comora represent some of the most sophisticated infrastructure within the Dark City. Conduit systems built into the foundations of major districts can collect and redistribute suffering from centralized torture facilities to residential areas, commercial districts, and military installations where Drukhari populations require constant sustenance. The maintenance of these networks requires specialized technicians who understand both the engineering principles involved and the specific requirements for preserving psychic energy during transmission across vast distances. Slave procurement operations begin with extensive intelligence gathering that can span decades of preparation as Drukhari scouts identify suitable target populations and assess their capture potential. The most valuable targets combine high population density with limited defensive capabilities and geographic isolation that prevents rapid military response to raiding operations. Imperial hive worlds represent ideal hunting grounds due to their massive populations and the complex urban environments that provide numerous opportunities for concealment and infiltration, while frontier colonies offer easier conquest but lower population yields that may not justify the resources required for large-scale portal deployment. The assessment of target populations involves detailed analysis of their biological and psychological characteristics to determine their suitability for different types of exploitation. Humans represent the most common captive species due to their widespread distribution throughout the galaxy and their capacity for both physical and emotional suffering, while their relatively short lifespans create constant demand for fresh replacements. Tau populations provide interesting variations in psychological torture due to their collective mindset and philosophical dedication to the greater good, making their despair particularly potent when their belief systems are systematically dismantled through carefully orchestrated suffering. Orc captives present unique challenges and opportunities for Drukhari slavers, as their natural aggression and pain tolerance require specialized handling techniques, while their capacity for violence makes them valuable subjects for gladiatorial combat. The orc psychology that treats pain as merely another form of stimulation necessitates more creative approaches to torture, often involving the systematic destruction of their ability to fight or the forced observation of their companions, suffering rather than direct physical abuse. The most skilled Drukhari torturers have developed techniques for breaking orc mental resilience by exploiting their pack mentalities and competitive instincts. The capture of high-value individuals requires specialized raid configurations that prioritize precision and stealth over the mass casualty operations typical of standard slave procurement missions. Imperial governors, military commanders, and other leadership figures represent premium targets whose psychological profiles have been studied extensively to identify the specific fears and attachments that can be exploited during their subsequent torture. The capture of such individuals often involves elaborate deceptions and infiltration operations that may take years to execute, but the psychic energy generated by their systematic destruction can sustain entire cabal hierarchies for extended periods. Psyker procurement represents the most dangerous and valuable aspect of slave trading operations, as these individuals possess both the mental capabilities necessary for generating exceptional psychic energy and the potential to pose significant threats to their captors if inadequately contained. The capture of sanctioned psychers from Imperial worlds requires specialized equipment and techniques designed to suppress their abilities while keeping them alive and conscious. Unsanctioned psychers and those from non-imperial civilizations may possess unpredictable abilities that require even more sophisticated containment measures, but their untrained minds often prove more susceptible to the psychological manipulation techniques employed by skilled torturers. The transportation of captured psychers through webway portals creates additional complications due to the dimensional instabilities that their abilities can generate during transit. Specialized containment vessels equipped with psychic dampening fields and neural inhibitors must be employed to prevent captive psychers from disrupting portal operations or alerting other psychically sensitive individuals to ongoing Drukhari activities. The most valuable psyker captives are often kept in chemically induced comas during transport to minimize the risk of escape attempts or psychic backlash that might damage other cargo or personnel. Processing facilities within Camorra represent the industrial infrastructure that transforms captured populations into the various categories of slaves required by different aspects of Dark City society. New arrivals undergo systematic evaluation to determine their optimal allocation based on physical capabilities, psychological profiles, and estimated lifespan under different types of exploitation. The most robust specimens might be assigned to heavy labor operations that require physical strength but offer relatively quick deaths, while those with specialized skills or interesting psychological characteristics are reserved for more sophisticated applications that can extract maximum value from their suffering over extended periods. The categorization process involves both automated systems that can rapidly assess basic physical and mental characteristics and specialized evaluators who identify the subtle qualities that determine a captive's suitability for particular applications. Drukhari with expertise in different species, psychology, and physiology examine new arrivals to identify those with the mental resilience necessary for prolonged torture, the creative intelligence that makes psychological manipulation more rewarding, or the specific fears and attachments that can be exploited to generate optimal suffering levels. Medical evaluation of slave populations serves multiple purposes beyond simple health assessment, as Drukhari medical techniques can identify genetic markers, psychological predispositions, and physiological characteristics that affect a captive's value in different markets. Individuals with rare genetic traits might be reserved for homunculus experimentation, while those with specific medical conditions could be allocated to torture scenarios designed to exploit their particular vulnerabilities. The medical data collected during processing also enables the development of customized torture regimens that maximize psychic energy generation while prolonging the victim's useful lifespan. Arena distribution represents one of the most visible applications of slave labor within Camorra, as gladiatorial combat provides both entertainment for the Dark City's population and a source of concentrated suffering that can sustain large numbers of Drukhari simultaneously. The selection of arena combatants involves identifying individuals with the physical capabilities and psychological characteristics necessary for effective combat, while ensuring that their eventual deaths will generate maximum psychic energy for the attending audience. Former military personnel represent premium arena stock due to their combat training and the psychological impact of their gradual degradation from proud warriors to desperate entertainment. The preparation of arena combatants involves training regimens designed to enhance their combat capabilities while simultaneously breaking down their psychological defenses and moral frameworks. Captives are forced to compete against each other for basic necessities, creating situations where survival requires abandoning previous ethical constraints and embracing the violence that their captors demand. The most successful arena preparation techniques exploit existing rivalries and prejudices among captive populations, turning former allies against each other while providing Drukhari audiences with the spectacle of civilized beings reduced to savage desperation. Combat drug administration represents a crucial aspect of arena operations, as chemical enhancement can prolong fights while intensifying the suffering experienced by participants. Stimulants that increase aggression and reduce pain sensitivity allow combatants to continue fighting despite severe injuries, while psychoactive compounds can heighten emotional responses and create more dramatic psychological breakdowns for audience entertainment. The most sophisticated drug regimens can manipulate combatant behavior to create specific types of conflicts or emotional responses that generate optimal psychic energy for different audience demographics. Laboratory allocation provides homunculus covens with the raw materials necessary for their flesh crafting experiments and pain research, while simultaneously generating the scientific knowledge that enables continued innovation in torture techniques and biological manipulation. Captives assigned to laboratory work face fates that often exceed even arena combat in terms of prolonged suffering, as homunculi possess both the technical knowledge and the philosophical motivation necessary to explore the absolute limits of biological pain tolerance and psychological endurance. The scientific value of laboratory subjects extends beyond simple torture to encompass research into biological systems, psychological mechanisms, and the fundamental principles that govern consciousness and suffering. Homunculi conduct experiments designed to identify new methods for amplifying pain responses, extending subject lifespans under extreme conditions, and developing enhanced torture techniques that can generate greater psychic energy yields. The knowledge gained from these investigations benefits the entire Drukhari civilization by improving their ability to extract maximum value from captive populations. Experimental protocols employed in homunculus laboratories often involve systematic exploration of different torture methodologies to identify optimal approaches for specific subject types and research objectives. Individual captives might be subjected to carefully controlled variations in torture techniques, while their responses are monitored and recorded to develop improved procedures for future applications. The most valuable research subjects are those who survive multiple experimental sessions while maintaining their capacity for suffering, as longitudinal studies can provide insights into the long-term effects of different torture methodologies. Pleasure district allocation represents perhaps the most psychologically devastating fate that awaits captured slaves, as these assignments involve systematic exploitation that combines physical abuse with emotional manipulation, designed to destroy the victim's sense of identity and self-worth. The establishments that operate within Comora's pleasure districts cater to the sophisticated tastes of Drukhari clientele, who have spent millennia exploring every possible variation of cruelty and degradation, requiring constant innovation and fresh victims to maintain their interest and generate the psychic energy necessary for their survival. The preparation of slaves for pleasure district work involves extensive conditioning designed to break down psychological resistance while maintaining the emotional responsiveness that makes their suffering valuable to Drukhari clients. Captives undergo systematic abuse that destroys their previous identities and relationships while creating new dependencies and vulnerabilities that can be exploited for entertainment purposes. The most effective conditioning techniques exploit the victim's specific cultural background, personal relationships, and individual fears to create customized psychological torture that generates maximum suffering while ensuring compliance with client demands. Economic systems built around slave trading operate according to market principles that would be familiar to conventional civilizations, albeit with commodities and valuation criteria that reflect the unique requirements of Drukhari society. The prices commanded by different types of slaves fluctuate based on supply and demand dynamics, seasonal variations in torture requirements, and the specific preferences of major purchasers who can influence market conditions through their buying patterns. Premium specimens command extraordinary prices that can fund major military operations or territorial acquisitions, while bulk laborers trade at commodity rates that make them accessible to lower-tier Drukhari who lack the resources for more exotic purchases. Market specialization has created distinct trading sectors that focus on particular types of slaves or specific applications for captive labor. Psyker markets operate according to different principles than those governing physical laborers, with pricing structures that reflect the complex risk-reward calculations involved in handling psychically active individuals. Combat slave markets cater to arena operators and private collectors who require subjects with specific fighting capabilities or entertainment value, while academic markets serve homunculus covens and other research-oriented purchasers who prioritize intellectual capabilities over physical characteristics. The infrastructure supporting slave markets within Comora includes specialized facilities for storage, evaluation, and display of human merchandise under conditions that preserve their value while preventing escape or rebellion. Holding facilities incorporate both physical restraints and psychological manipulation techniques designed to maintain captive compliance, while preventing the kind of despair or resignation that might reduce their entertainment value. Climate control systems maintain optimal conditions for different species, while monitoring systems track the health and psychological state of individual captives to identify those requiring medical intervention or enhanced security measures. Auction systems employed by major slave markets utilize sophisticated evaluation criteria that assess both obvious characteristics and subtle qualities that affect a captive's long-term value under different types of exploitation. Professional evaluators with expertise in different species and torture applications examine potential purchases to identify hidden qualities that might not be apparent to casual observers, while bidding systems allow purchasers to compete for premium specimens while ensuring that market prices reflect true demand levels. The harvesting of psychic anguish represents the ultimate purpose underlying all slave trade activities, as the systematic extraction of suffering from captive populations provides the energy necessary to sustain Drukhari civilization against Slaanesh hunger. The techniques employed to maximize anguish production involve careful balance between intensity and duration, as excessive torture can result in psychological shutdown or death that eliminates the source of psychic energy, while insufficient stimulation fails to generate the levels of suffering required for effective soul sustenance. Professional torturers within Drukhari society possess specialized knowledge regarding the optimal methods for extracting maximum psychic energy from different types of subjects while prolonging their useful lifespans. These individuals study the psychology and physiology of various species to identify the specific techniques that produce the most intense suffering for each captive type, while also developing the artistic sensibilities necessary to create torture scenarios that provide aesthetic satisfaction for Drukhari audiences. The most skilled practitioners can maintain individual subjects for decades or even centuries, while continuously generating high levels of psychic energy through carefully managed torture regimens. The amplification technologies developed to enhance psychic energy collection utilize principles derived from both conventional electronics and more exotic dimensional manipulation techniques that tap into the same forces that enable webway travel. Pain amplifiers can broadcast the suffering of individual captives across vast distances while simultaneously intensifying the experience for the victim, creating feedback loops that generate exponentially greater psychic energy yields than simple torture alone could provide. The most advanced systems can network multiple torture sessions to create synchronized suffering events that produce psychic energy surges capable of sustaining entire districts of Camorra simultaneously. The intricate web of temporary partnerships that enables Camorra's continued existence extends far beyond the internal politics of competing cabals to encompass relationships with the other major factions that inhabit the Dark City's sprawling districts. These alliances represent calculated arrangements where mutual benefit temporarily overrides the natural hostility and suspicion that characterizes most interactions between different Drukhari organizations. The cabals, despite their dominance in terms of military strength and territorial control, require specialized services and capabilities that can only be obtained through careful negotiation with groups whose expertise complements their own operational requirements. The relationship between cabals and witch cults represents one of the most complex and volatile partnerships within Camorra's political landscape. These alliances typically form around specific operational requirements, where the cult's expertise in close-quarters combat and spectacular violence provides capabilities that conventional cabal forces cannot match. The Cult of Strife, as the most prominent and influential of these organizations, maintains working relationships with multiple cabals simultaneously, carefully balancing their commitments to avoid conflicts of interest while maximizing their access to the resources and opportunities that these partnerships provide. Witch cults approach warfare from a fundamentally different philosophical perspective than their cabal allies, viewing combat as an art form that requires constant refinement and creative expression rather than simply a means of achieving tactical objectives. This difference in motivation creates both opportunities and challenges when integrating cult forces into Cabal operations. The Witches' pursuit of perfect combat and aesthetic violence can provide psychological warfare effects that exceed their actual combat contributions, as enemy forces confronted with their acrobatic fighting styles and obvious enjoyment of violence often experience terror responses that disrupt organized resistance more effectively than conventional weapons fire. The gladiatorial entertainment provided by witch cults serves multiple functions within Comora's society beyond simple spectacle, creating venues where different cabals can interact on neutral ground, while their members witness displays of combat artistry that inspire both admiration and competitive rivalry. The arenas controlled by major cults like the Cult of Strife operate according to complex protocols that ensure fair treatment for all participating factions, while maintaining the dramatic tension necessary to generate the psychic energy that sustains attending audiences. These events provide opportunities for archons and other high-ranking Drukhari to conduct diplomatic negotiations in settings where their personal security is guaranteed by ancient traditions that even the most treacherous politicians respect. Arena combat serves as a testing ground where promising warriors from different factions can demonstrate their capabilities, while archons evaluate potential recruits or assess the combat effectiveness of rival organizations. The performance of individual fighters in arena settings provides intelligence regarding the training methods, equipment quality, and tactical doctrines employed by their parent organizations, allowing observant leaders to identify strengths and weaknesses that might be exploited during future conflicts. The most successful arena combatants often receive recruitment offers from multiple cabals, creating bidding wars that can significantly elevate the status and compensation of exceptional fighters. The neutral status maintained by major witch cults allows them to serve as intermediaries in disputes between rival cabals, providing secure meeting locations and reliable communication channels for factions that cannot risk direct contact due to ongoing hostilities. The Cult of Strife has developed particular expertise in facilitating these negotiations, maintaining facilities specifically designed for diplomatic meetings where representatives of warring factions can explore potential agreements without appearing weak or desperate to their own followers. These services command premium prices and create valuable relationships that can be leveraged to obtain favorable treatment during future negotiations. The integration of witch cult forces into major cabal operations requires careful coordination to prevent conflicts between the different organizational cultures and tactical approaches favored by each faction. Witches operate according to individual initiative and artistic inspiration that can conflict with the disciplined unit tactics employed by most cabal forces, requiring operational plans that provide clear boundaries between areas where each faction maintains tactical control. Successful joint operations typically assign cult forces to roles that exploit their particular strengths while minimizing opportunities for command disputes or tactical interference with cabal objectives. Combat drug expertise represents another area where witch cults provide valuable services to their cabal allies, as their emphasis on physical enhancement and sensory amplification has driven extensive research into chemical compounds that can improve combat performance while providing the heightened sensations that Drukhari require for psychological sustenance. The stimulants and performance enhancers developed by cult alchemists often exceed the capabilities of similar compounds produced by cabal weapon shops, incorporating exotic ingredients and sophisticated formulations that reflect millennia of experimentation with consciousness-altering substances. The partnerships between cabals and homunculus covens represent perhaps the most crucial and dangerous alliances within Comora's political structure, as these ancient fleshcrafters possess capabilities that no other faction can replicate while simultaneously maintaining the independence and resources necessary to pose existential threats to any organization that attempts to dominate them directly. The Coven's mastery of biological manipulation, pain amplification, and resurrection technologies makes them indispensable partners for ambitious archons, while their alien psychology and obvious sadism creates constant tension in relationships that require careful management to prevent catastrophic breakdowns. Resurrection services provided by homunculi represent the most valuable and sought-after capability offered by the Covens, as the ability to return from death provides Drukhari leaders with unprecedented opportunities for risk-taking and aggressive expansion that would be suicidal for individuals limited to single lifespans. The resurrection process involves sophisticated biological reconstruction that can restore individuals from minimal remains while preserving their memories, personalities, and accumulated knowledge, though the psychological trauma associated with death and rebirth often produces subtle changes in behavior and motivation that can affect long-term relationships and decision-making patterns. The contracts governing resurrection services include complex provisions regarding the circumstances under which homunculi will provide their services, the payment structures that compensate them for their efforts, and the quality guarantees that ensure restored individuals retain their essential characteristics and capabilities. Premium resurrection contracts might include provisions for multiple deaths, accelerated recovery times, or enhanced physical capabilities that exceed the client's original biological specifications, while basic agreements typically cover single resurrections with standard recovery periods and minimal modifications to the restored body. Enhanced warrior programs offered by various homunculus covens provide cabals with access to biological modifications that can significantly improve the combat effectiveness of their forces while creating distinctive capabilities that set them apart from rival organizations. These enhancement programs range from relatively minor improvements, such as increased reflexes or enhanced sensory capabilities, to dramatic modifications that fundamentally alter the recipient's biological structure and combat potential. The most extensive modification programs can transform ordinary Cabalite warriors into specialized combatants whose capabilities approach those of purpose-built combat creatures. The biological modifications employed in warrior enhancement programs draw upon millennia of research into alien physiology, genetic manipulation, and surgical techniques that push the boundaries of what conventional medicine considers possible. Homunculi can graft additional limbs onto recipients to provide enhanced combat capabilities, modify skeletal structures to improve strength and durability, or integrate exotic sensory organs that allow enhanced awareness of battlefield conditions. The most sophisticated modifications involve neural interface systems that can directly link enhanced warriors to their weapons and equipment, creating seamless integration between biological and technological systems. Grotesque creation represents the pinnacle of homunculus flesh crafting capabilities, producing combat creatures that combine the biological material of multiple species with technological enhancements and pain amplification systems that create beings whose very existence generates the psychic energy necessary to sustain their creators. These creatures serve as both weapons and sources of psychic sustenance for the covens, while providing their Cabal clients with access to combat capabilities that cannot be countered by conventional military responses. The design and construction of grotesques involves careful selection of biological components that provide optimal combinations of strength, durability, and pain tolerance, while incorporating technological systems that enhance their combat effectiveness and ensure their continued loyalty to their creators. The most successful grotesque designs balance physical capabilities against psychological stability, as excessive modification can produce creatures that are too unstable or unpredictable for effective military deployment. The creation process itself generates significant psychic energy through the suffering of the donor organisms, providing immediate benefits to the homunculi while producing long-term assets that continue generating value throughout their operational lifespans. Pain engine construction represents another specialized service offered by homunculus covens that provides Cabals with access to mobile torture platforms that can generate psychic energy during combat operations, while simultaneously serving as heavy weapons platforms and psychological warfare tools. These vehicles combine advanced technology with biological components and torture chambers that allow them to process captives during active combat, creating self-sustaining weapon systems that become more effective as they accumulate victims throughout extended campaigns. The technical specifications for Pain engines vary significantly between different Coven designs and client requirements, with some emphasizing mobility and firepower for front-line combat roles, while others focus on torture efficiency and psychic energy generation for support functions. The most advanced Pain engine designs incorporate adaptive systems that can modify their operational parameters based on battlefield conditions and available victim populations, maximizing their effectiveness across different types of missions and combat environments. Temporary alliances with Corsair bands represent a more opportunistic category of partnership that typically forms around specific operational objectives, where the Corsair's knowledge of real space conditions and their access to conventional starships provide capabilities that complement Drukhari portal-based deployment methods. These relationships are inherently unstable due to the fundamental differences between Corsair and Drukhari motivations, but they can provide significant advantages during major operations that require extended presence in real space or coordination with conventional military forces. Corsair expertise in conventional starship operations allows joint forces to conduct extended campaigns in real space without relying entirely on webway portals for logistical support and tactical mobility. Their ships can provide fire support, transportation capacity, and sensor coverage that exceed the capabilities of typical Drukhari raiding fleets, while their crews possess knowledge of Imperial Navy tactics and procedures that can be valuable during operations against human targets. The most successful Corsair partnerships involve clearly defined operational boundaries that prevent conflicts between different tactical approaches, while ensuring that both factions benefit from the collaboration. Intelligence sharing between Corsairs and their Drukhari allies can provide both factions with access to information networks and reconnaissance capabilities that neither could maintain independently. Corsair agents operating within Imperial space can provide detailed intelligence regarding target vulnerabilities, defensive preparations, and response capabilities that enable more effective raid planning, while Drukhari contacts within Camorra can offer access to exotic weapons, specialized equipment, and torture techniques that enhance Corsair operational capabilities. The integration of Corsair forces into Drukhari operations requires careful coordination to prevent tactical conflicts and ensure that joint forces can operate effectively despite their different equipment, training, and command structures. Corsair warriors typically employ more conventional weapons and tactics than their Drukhari allies, requiring operational plans that account for these differences while maximizing the combined effectiveness of both force types. The most successful joint operations assign each faction to roles that exploit their particular strengths while minimizing opportunities for confusion or friendly fire incidents. Alliances with Craftworld Eldar represent the most unusual and politically sensitive partnerships that Cabals occasionally pursue, typically forming only when existential threats require cooperation between factions that would normally be implacable enemies. These relationships are complicated by the fundamental philosophical differences between Craftworld and Drukhari societies, as well as the mutual contempt and distrust that characterizes most interactions between the two branches of the Eldar race. The circumstances that can drive Craftworld Eldar to ally with their dark cousins typically involve threats that pose existential risks to both factions, such as major chaos incursions, Tyranid hive fleet invasions, or other catastrophic events that threaten to eliminate Eldar populations regardless of their cultural affiliations. These crisis situations can create temporary commonalities of interest that override normal hostilities, allowing both factions to focus their capabilities against shared enemies while maintaining their essential independence and cultural integrity. Military coordination between Craftworld and Drukhari forces requires extensive negotiation and careful planning to prevent conflicts between fundamentally incompatible tactical doctrines and operational philosophies. Craftworld forces emphasize careful planning, minimal casualties, and the protection of civilian populations, while Drukhari operations prioritize speed, psychological impact, and the acquisition of captives for torture. Joint operations must be structured to allow each faction to contribute their particular strengths while preventing their different approaches from undermining overall effectiveness. Intelligence cooperation between the two Eldar factions can provide both sides with access to information networks and analytical capabilities that significantly enhance their understanding of shared threats and potential response options. Craftworld seers possess prophetic abilities that can identify future threats and optimal response strategies, while Drukhari intelligence networks provide detailed information regarding enemy capabilities, weaknesses, and potential vulnerabilities that can be exploited during joint operations. Mercenary relationships with human rogue traders represent another category of opportunistic alliance that can provide cabals with access to Imperial intelligence, trade networks, and political connections that would be impossible to obtain through conventional raiding operations. These partnerships are inherently risky for both parties, as discovery by Imperial authorities would result in severe consequences for the rogue traders while providing Drukhari allies with limited protection against Imperial retaliation. The services that rogue traders can provide to their Drukhari partners include detailed intelligence regarding Imperial military deployments, trade route schedules, and political developments that affect potential raiding targets. Their access to Imperial communication networks and administrative systems allows them to provide advance warning of military responses to Drukhari activities, while their trading operations can serve as cover for more covert forms of cooperation. The compensation structures for these mercenary relationships typically involve combinations of exotic materials, advanced technologies, and specialized services that rogue traders cannot obtain through conventional Imperial channels. Drukhari partners might provide access to alien artifacts, advanced weapon systems, or medical technologies that can provide significant advantages in the competitive environment of Imperial commerce, while their torture expertise can be valuable for extracting information from captured rivals or enemies. Xeno-species partnerships represent the most diverse category of temporary alliance, as the galaxy contains numerous alien civilizations whose capabilities and motivations can align with Drukhari interests under specific circumstances. These relationships require extensive cultural research and diplomatic sophistication to navigate the complex differences between species, while identifying areas of mutual benefit that justify the risks associated with cooperation. The evaluation of potential Xenos partners involves detailed analysis of their military capabilities, technological assets, territorial holdings, and political structures to identify opportunities for profitable cooperation while assessing the risks associated with different types of partnership arrangements. Species with advanced technology but limited military capabilities might provide valuable equipment or technical expertise in exchange for protection or military support, while warrior cultures might offer combat assistance in exchange for access to Drukhari weapons or training methods. The martial history of the Cabals extends far beyond their current role as raiders and slave takers, encompassing major conflicts that have shaped the balance of power across the galaxy for millennia. During the Age of Strife, when humanity's first stellar empire collapsed into anarchy, and the warp storms that heralded Slaanesh's birth raged across known space, the emerging Drukhari factions found themselves presented with unprecedented opportunities for expansion and conquest. The chaos that consumed human civilization created power vacuums that ambitious Cabals could exploit, while the weakening of Imperial defenses made previously impregnable worlds vulnerable to sustained assault campaigns. The early conflicts of this period differed significantly from the lightning raids that would later become the Drukhari's signature tactical approach. Extended campaigns lasting decades or even centuries allowed Cabals to establish permanent footholds on conquered worlds, creating forward bases that supported deeper penetration into real space territories. The Cabal of the Black Heart's expansion during this era exemplified this approach, with Vex forces systematically conquering entire star systems through coordinated multi-front operations that combined conventional military tactics with the psychological warfare techniques that would become hallmarks of Drukhari strategy. The collapse of human stellar navigation during the Age of Strife provided Drukhari forces with decisive advantages, as their mastery of webway travel allowed them to maintain reliable transportation and communication networks, while their enemies struggled with the unpredictable warp storms that made conventional faster-than-light travel extremely hazardous. Cabal fleets could strike at targets across vast distances with perfect coordination, appearing simultaneously at multiple locations to overwhelm defensive forces that had been isolated by the breakdown of Imperial communication systems. The systematic conquest of the Gehenna system during the late Age of Strife demonstrated the full potential of coordinated Cabal warfare when multiple factions cooperated toward shared objectives. The Black Heart, Flayed Skull, and Poison Tongue Cabals combined their forces in a campaign that lasted nearly 2 centuries, gradually wearing down the system's defenders through relentless pressure and psychological warfare. The Flayed Skull's aerial supremacy eliminated enemy air defenses and orbital installations, while the Poison Tongue's infiltration specialists disrupted command structures and eliminated key leadership figures. The Black Heart's conventional forces provided the sustained pressure necessary to prevent enemy forces from regrouping or establishing effective defensive positions. The fall of Gehenna Prime, the system's primary hive world, required innovative siege techniques that adapted traditional Drukhari mobility tactics to the requirements of urban warfare. Cabal forces established forward bases within the Hive City's superstructure, using captured industrial facilities to manufacture specialized equipment and process slave populations, while maintaining pressure on remaining defensive positions. The gradual conversion of conquered sectors into torture facilities served dual purposes, providing the psychic sustenance necessary to maintain Drukhari forces during extended operations, while creating terror effects that undermined enemy morale throughout the remaining unconquered areas. The Great Crusade's expansion into sectors previously controlled by Drukhari forces created the first major conflicts between Cabal armies and the unified military machine of the emerging Imperium. The Imperial forces encountered during these campaigns represented a fundamentally different challenge than the fragmented human civilizations that Cabals had previously faced, as the Crusade fleets possessed superior numbers, advanced technology, and the tactical coordination necessary to counter traditional Drukhari advantages in mobility and surprise. The Battle of Korath demonstrated both the potential and limitations of Cabal resistance to Imperial expansion, as a coalition of minor Cabals attempted to defend their territorial holdings against the 47th Expeditionary Fleet. The Drukhari forces initially achieved significant success through their superior knowledge of local webway routes and their ability to coordinate strikes against Imperial supply lines and communication networks. However, the Imperial response escalated beyond conventional military operations to include systematic destruction of webway portals and the deployment of specialized anti-Xenos equipment designed specifically to counter Drukhari tactical advantages. The Astartes legions that spearheaded many Crusade operations proved particularly effective against Drukhari forces due to their enhanced physiology and psychological conditioning that reduced their vulnerability to fear-based tactics and torture-derived intelligence gathering. The Space Marines' power armor provided protection against splinter weapons and other Drukhari armaments, while their tactical doctrines emphasized rapid deployment and overwhelming force that could match Drukhari mobility while exceeding their firepower and durability. The most successful Cabal operations against Astartes forces required extensive preparation and specialized equipment designed to exploit the specific weaknesses of different Legion tactical approaches. The Iron Warriors' methodical siege warfare proved particularly challenging for Drukhari defenders, as their systematic approach to fortress reduction eliminated many of the tactical advantages that Cabals typically exploited during defensive operations. The Legion's expertise in artillery and siege engineering allowed them to destroy Drukhari defensive positions from ranges that exceeded the effective engagement distances of most Dark Eldar weapons, while their disciplined approach to urban warfare prevented the kind of tactical confusion that Drukhari forces normally exploited to achieve local superiority. The White Scar's emphasis on rapid assault and mobile warfare created different challenges for Cabal forces, as their tactical approach mirrored many aspects of traditional Drukhari strategy while possessing superior durability and firepower. Engagements between White Scar's forces and Drukhari raiders often devolved into high-speed pursuit actions, where both sides attempted to exploit their mobility advantages while avoiding decisive engagement that might favor their opponent's particular strengths. The most successful Drukhari operations against the White Scars involved terrain manipulation and portal deployment that forced the Space Marines into confined environments where their mobility advantages were reduced. The Imperial Fist's defensive expertise created nearly insurmountable challenges for Cabal assault operations, as their fortification techniques and defensive doctrines were specifically designed to counter the kind of rapid assault tactics that formed the foundation of Drukhari military strategy. The Legion's systematic approach to defensive preparation eliminated many of the infiltration routes and weak points that Drukhari forces normally exploited, while their heavy weapons and artillery provided sustained firepower that could engage Drukhari skimmer craft at extended ranges where return fire was ineffective. The 13th Black Crusade provided the Cabals with their most significant opportunity for large-scale military operations since the Age of Strife, as Abaddon's assault on the Cadian Gate created widespread chaos throughout Imperial space that could be exploited for massive slave procurement operations. The breakdown of Imperial coordination and the redeployment of military assets to counter the Chaos offensive left numerous worlds vulnerable to Drukhari attack, while the general state of emergency provided cover for raiding operations that might otherwise have triggered coordinated Imperial responses. Vex's strategic coordination of Cabal participation in the Black Crusade demonstrated the sophisticated planning capabilities that had enabled his rise to power within Camorra. Rather than committing Drukhari forces to direct support of Chaos objectives, he orchestrated a series of opportunistic raids that maximized slave acquisition while minimizing exposure to Imperial counterattacks or Chaos corruption. The timing of these operations was carefully calculated to exploit the confusion created by Chaos assaults while avoiding direct confrontation with either Imperial defenders or Chaos forces that might view Drukhari intervention as unwelcome competition. The Cabal of the Flayed Skulls operations during the Cadian campaign exemplified the opportunities created by large-scale warfare, as their aerial superiority allowed them to conduct deep penetration raids against targets that would normally have been protected by Imperial air defenses. The redeployment of Imperial Navy assets to counter Chaos fleet movements left many worlds with reduced atmospheric protection, creating opportunities for sustained air assault campaigns that could process entire population centers before Imperial reinforcements could respond effectively. The systematic exploitation of refugee populations during the Black Crusade represented one of the most profitable aspects of Cabal participation in the campaign. The displacement of civilian populations by Chaos advances created massive concentrations of potential slaves in refugee camps and evacuation centers that possessed minimal defensive capabilities. Cabal forces could process these populations with minimal resistance, while the Imperial military remained focused on direct combat with Chaos forces, creating a sustainable source of captives that could be maintained throughout the extended duration of the campaign. The Obsidian Rose's precision strikes against Imperial command and communication facilities during the Black Crusade demonstrated how specialized Cabal capabilities could contribute to broader strategic objectives while serving their own interests. Their systematic elimination of astropathic communication nodes and military command centers created coordination problems for Imperial forces that exceeded the direct military impact of the raids themselves, while the capture of high-ranking Imperial officers provided valuable intelligence regarding defensive plans and resource allocation. Defensive operations against Chaos incursions into the webway represent some of the most critical military actions undertaken by Cabal forces, as these conflicts directly threaten the infrastructure that enables Comora's existence and the survival of Drukhari civilization. The ancient barriers that separate the webway from the warp provide protection against direct Chaos assault, but they require constant maintenance and active defense against entities that seek to exploit weaknesses in the dimensional boundaries that maintain the tunnel network's integrity. The Battle of the Nexus Tertius demonstrated the coordination capabilities that Cabal forces could achieve when facing existential threats to their civilization. Multiple Cabals combined their forces under Black Heart coordination to counter a major Chaos incursion that threatened to establish permanent footholds within the webway itself. The defensive operations required innovative tactics that adapted traditional Drukhari mobility, advantages to the confined environments of webway tunnels, while maintaining the firepower necessary to counter Chaos forces that possessed superior durability and numbers. The deployment of specialized anti-Chaos equipment during these defensive operations revealed the extent of Drukhari technological capabilities when facing threats that conventional weapons could not effectively counter. Dimensional stabilizers developed by homunculus covens could reinforce weakened sections of webway barriers, while psychic dampening fields provided protection against the corrupting influence of Chaos entities that attempted to subvert Drukhari forces through direct mental contact. The coordination between Cabal forces and other Comora factions during major defensive operations created temporary unity that demonstrated the potential military capabilities of the Dark City when properly organized. Witch cults provided specialized close combat capabilities that were essential for tunnel fighting, while homunculus covens contributed both defensive technologies and combat creatures specifically adapted for anti-Chaos operations. The integration of these different force types required sophisticated command structures that could coordinate their diverse capabilities while maintaining the tactical flexibility necessary for effective response to rapidly changing battlefield conditions. The Siege of Shaddam represented one of the most significant Cabal victories in recent millennia, as a coalition of Drukhari forces successfully defended a major webway nexus against sustained assault by a Word-Bearer's warband supported by demonic allies. The defensive campaign lasted nearly a decade and required the deployment of the largest coordinated Drukhari force since the Age of Strife, with over a dozen major Cabals contributing forces under Black Heart overall command. The tactical innovations developed during the Shaddam campaign influenced Drukhari military doctrine for centuries afterward, particularly in the areas of tunnel warfare and coordination between different unit types in confined environments. The use of modified Ravager gunships as mobile artillery platforms proved particularly effective in webway combat, where their firepower could be concentrated against choke points, while their mobility allowed rapid redeployment to counter enemy breakthrough attempts. The psychological warfare techniques employed during the Shaddam defense demonstrated the effectiveness of Drukhari terror tactics against even Chaos forces, as the systematic torture of captured word-bearers created morale problems among the attacking forces that exceeded the direct military impact of casualty infliction. The broadcast of torture sessions through captured communication equipment created doubt and fear among Chaos forces that had previously considered themselves immune to such psychological manipulation. notable defeats suffered by Cabal forces have provided valuable lessons regarding the limitations of traditional Drukhari tactics and the importance of adapting to different types of opposition. The massacre at Xerxia Prime demonstrated the vulnerabilities that Cabal forces faced when confronting enemies that possessed superior coordination and firepower, as an overconfident assault by the Cabal of the Last Hatred was systematically destroyed by prepared Imperial Guard defenses supported by Titan Legion assets. The tactical analysis of the Xerxia disaster revealed fundamental flaws in the intelligence gathering and operational planning that had characterized the Last Hatred's approach to the campaign. The Cabal's focus on anti-imperial warfare had created overconfidence in their ability to counter human military capabilities, leading them to underestimate the defensive preparations and coordination capabilities of the planetary defense forces. The systematic destruction of Drukhari forces by coordinated artillery and air defense systems demonstrated the importance of comprehensive reconnaissance and adaptive tactical planning. The political consequences of major military defeats often exceed their direct impact on Cabal military capabilities, as failed operations can trigger succession struggles and territorial disputes that fundamentally alter the balance of power within Commorragh. The Last Hatred's losses at Xerxia created opportunities for rival Cabals to challenge their territorial holdings and recruit their surviving personnel, while the reputation damage from the defeat reduced their ability to attract new members or negotiate favorable alliance terms with other factions. The current territorial distribution within Commorragh reflects the accumulated results of millennia of military successes and failures, as Cabals that have demonstrated consistent operational effectiveness have been able to expand their holdings, while those that have suffered major defeats have seen their influence diminish accordingly. The Black Heart's dominance over the most valuable districts represents the practical recognition of their military superiority and political acumen, while smaller Cabals maintain their independence through specialization in particular capabilities, or by avoiding direct competition with more powerful rivals. The evolution of Cabal military doctrine continues to respond to changing conditions in the broader galaxy, as new threats and opportunities require adaptation of traditional tactics and development of innovative approaches to warfare. The emergence of new imperial technologies, the increasing coordination of anti-Drukhari operations by various civilizations, and the changing nature of chaos threats all contribute to ongoing refinement of Cabal military capabilities and strategic planning processes. The opening of the Great Rift has fundamentally altered the strategic landscape that governs Drukhari operations throughout the galaxy, creating unprecedented opportunities for expansion while simultaneously introducing new threats that challenge the traditional foundations of Commorragh's power structure. The massive warp storm that now bisects the galaxy has disrupted established Imperial communication networks and military coordination systems, leaving vast regions of space vulnerable to sustained Drukhari assault, while providing new routes of approach that bypass previously impregnable defensive positions. The Cicatrix Maledictum's chaotic energies have also destabilized many webway passages, creating both hazards and opportunities as ancient routes become accessible, while others are permanently severed from the network that sustains Dark City civilization. Vec's initial response to the Great Rift's emergence demonstrated the strategic foresight that has maintained his supremacy over Commorragh for millennia. Rather than immediately launching massive raiding campaigns to exploit the obvious opportunities created by Imperial disarray, he ordered extensive reconnaissance operations to map the new strategic environment and identify the most profitable targets, while assessing potential risks that might threaten Drukhari interests. This methodical approach reflected his understanding that the Rift's opening represented not merely tactical opportunities, but fundamental changes in galactic power dynamics that required careful analysis and measured responses. The disruption of astropathic communication networks throughout the Imperium Nihilus has created ideal conditions for large-scale Drukhari operations, as Imperial forces can no longer coordinate responses across multiple star systems or request reinforcements from distant military commands. Cabal raiding fleets can now conduct extended campaigns that would have been impossible during periods of effective Imperial coordination, systematically processing entire sectors, while enemy forces remain isolated and unable to mount unified resistance. The Cabal of the Flayed Skull has achieved particular success in exploiting these conditions, conducting aerial supremacy campaigns that establish temporary control over planetary atmospheres before systematic slave procurement operations strip target worlds of their populations. The emergence of new webway routes created by the Rift's dimensional distortions has provided Drukhari forces with access to previously unreachable regions of space, including areas within the galactic core that had been sealed off since the fall of the Eldar. These ancient passages often lead to locations of significant archaeological and strategic value, including pre-fall Eldar installations that contain technologies and resources unavailable elsewhere in the galaxy. The exploration and exploitation of these rediscovered territories has become a major focus for ambitious cabals seeking to establish new power bases beyond the traditional confines of Comora's established hierarchy. The political ramifications of expanded territorial access have created new sources of conflict within Comora as different cabals compete for control over the most valuable newly accessible regions. Traditional territorial arrangements within the Dark City no longer reflect the actual distribution of strategic resources and opportunities, leading to disputes that threaten to destabilize the carefully maintained balance of power that Vect has cultivated over millennia. The Supreme Overlord's management of these tensions requires increasingly sophisticated political maneuvering as he seeks to prevent open warfare between major cabals while positioning the Black Heart to exploit the most promising opportunities for expansion. However, the Great Rift's opening has also introduced unprecedented threats that challenge fundamental assumptions about Drukhari security and operational capabilities. The massive influx of chaos energy throughout the galaxy has strengthened demonic entities and chaos cults that pose direct threats to webway infrastructure and Comora's dimensional stability. Several major webway nodes have been compromised by chaos incursions that required coordinated cabal responses to contain, while the increased prevalence of psychic phenomena throughout real space has made traditional raiding operations more dangerous and unpredictable. Chaos infiltration attempts against Comora itself represent the most serious internal threat that Drukhari civilization has faced since the original fall of the Eldar. The enhanced warp presence created by the Great Rift has enabled chaos entities to probe the dimensional barriers that protect the Dark City with unprecedented persistence and sophistication. Several minor districts have been evacuated and sealed after successful demonic breaches, while intelligence reports suggest that chaos cults have established footholds within some peripheral areas of the city's vast superstructure. The response to these infiltration attempts has required unprecedented cooperation between normally rival factions, as the existential nature of the threat forces even the most competitive cabals to coordinate their defensive efforts. Vect has established new security protocols that grant emergency powers to designated archons during confirmed chaos incursions, allowing rapid response without the political negotiations that normally characterize inter-cabal cooperation. These arrangements represent significant departures from traditional Comora politics and have created new precedents that may influence the city's governance structures long after the immediate crisis has passed. The Homunculus Covens have assumed crucial roles in developing countermeasures against chaos infiltration, utilizing their expertise in dimensional manipulation and biological warfare to create detection systems and defensive measures specifically designed to counter demonic threats. Their research into anti-chaos technologies has produced new categories of weapons and equipment that can disrupt demonic manifestations while providing protection for Drukhari personnel operating in high-risk environments. However, the Coven's involvement in these defensive efforts has also increased their political influence within Commorragh, creating new dynamics in the relationships between different factions. The emergence of Tyranid adaptation to Drukhari tactics represents another significant threat that has evolved in response to millennia of contact between the two species. Hive fleet tendrils that have encountered Drukhari forces have developed new bioforms specifically designed to counter traditional Dark Eldar advantages in mobility and stealth. These adaptations include creatures with enhanced sensory capabilities that can detect webway portal openings, aerial organisms that can match the performance characteristics of Drukhari skimmercraft, and ground forces with improved resistance to splinter weapons and other standard Drukhari armaments. The Tyranid learning process has proven particularly effective at countering Drukhari psychological warfare techniques, as the hive mind's collective consciousness appears immune to the terror tactics that have traditionally provided significant advantages during raiding operations. Tyranid forces show no response to torture displays or intimidation techniques that would cause other species to break and flee, requiring Drukhari raiders to rely entirely on their conventional military capabilities when engaging these enemies. This limitation has forced several cabals to develop new tactical approaches specifically for anti-Tyranid operations, including increased emphasis on heavy weapons and coordinated unit tactics rather than individual heroics and psychological manipulation. The adaptation of Tyranid bioforms to Drukhari weapons technology has created arms race dynamics that challenge the traditional technological superiority upon which Dark City military doctrine depends. Hive fleets have developed organic armor systems that provide enhanced resistance to splinter weapons and dark light energy, while their sensory organisms can detect the dimensional distortions associated with webway portal deployment. These evolutionary responses have reduced the effectiveness of traditional Drukhari raiding tactics and forced the development of new weapons systems and tactical approaches that can maintain operational superiority against increasingly sophisticated biological opponents. The political implications of Tyranid adaptation extend beyond simple military challenges to encompass fundamental questions about Drukhari long-term survival strategies. The traditional approach of exploiting technological and tactical superiority to dominate less advanced species becomes problematic when facing enemies that can rapidly evolve countermeasures to any advantage that Drukhari forces achieve. This reality has sparked debates within Commorragh regarding the need for more fundamental changes in military doctrine and strategic planning that account for enemies capable of continuous adaptation and improvement. Internal succession crises within major cabals have intensified as the changing strategic environment creates new opportunities and pressures that strain traditional leadership structures. The expanded scope of operations made possible by the Great Rift's disruption of imperial coordination has increased the resources and territories that successful archons can control, creating larger prizes for ambitious Drakons while simultaneously increasing the complexity of managing far-flung operations. Several major cabals have experienced leadership transitions, as established archons have proven unable to adapt to the new strategic environment or have fallen victim to subordinates who demonstrated superior capabilities in exploiting emerging opportunities. The succession struggle within the cabal of the Poisoned Tongue exemplifies the internal pressures that changing galactic conditions have created within Commorragh's political structure. The traditional emphasis on stealth and precision that defined the cabal's operational approach has become less relevant in an environment where large-scale operations and territorial control provide greater strategic advantages than specialized assassination capabilities. Ambitious Drakons within the organization have challenged their archons' continued adherence to traditional methods, arguing for tactical evolution that better exploits current opportunities while maintaining the cabal's distinctive expertise in covert operations. The resolution of these succession crises often determines not only the leadership of individual cabals, but also their future strategic directions and relationships with other factions within Camorra. New archons who achieve power through demonstrating superior adaptation to changing conditions typically implement significant organizational reforms that affect recruitment policies, tactical doctrines, and alliance structures. These changes can have cascading effects throughout the Dark City's political landscape as successful innovations are adopted by other factions, while failed experiments serve as cautionary examples for more conservative leaders. The evolution of cabal warfare in response to imperial technological advancement represents an ongoing arms race that has accelerated significantly since the Great Rift's opening. Imperial forces have developed new detection systems specifically designed to identify webway portal signatures and track Drukhari raiding fleets, while improved coordination protocols allow faster response times and more effective concentration of defensive resources. The Adeptus Mechanicus has produced specialized anti-Xenos weapons that provide enhanced effectiveness against Drukhari armor and vehicles, while new tactical doctrines emphasize rapid deployment and overwhelming firepower that can counter traditional Dark Eldar mobility advantages. Astartes counter-raid tactics have evolved to incorporate lessons learned from centuries of conflict with Drukhari forces, resulting in specialized units and equipment designed specifically for anti-Drukhari operations. These developments include rapid deployment protocols that can match Drukhari strike capabilities, enhanced sensory equipment that can detect stealth systems and dimensional anomalies, and weapons configurations optimized for engaging fast-moving targets in three-dimensional combat environments. The most successful Imperial counter-raid operations combine these tactical innovations with intelligence gathering that allows prediction of likely Drukhari targets and pre-positioning of response forces. The Drukhari response to these Imperial adaptations has required significant innovation in weapons technology and tactical doctrine to maintain the operational advantages that enable successful raiding operations. New generations of stealth systems incorporate quantum masking techniques that can defeat advanced Imperial sensors, while improved portal deployment methods reduce the signature characteristics that enemy forces use to detect and track webway activity. Weapons development has focused on creating armaments that can penetrate improved Imperial armor systems while maintaining the rapid-fire capabilities necessary for engaging multiple targets during fast-paced combat operations. Vehicle design evolution reflects the changing requirements of modern Drukhari warfare, with new configurations that emphasize survivability and firepower over the pure speed that characterized earlier generations of skimmer craft. Enhanced armor systems provide improved protection against Imperial heavy weapons while maintaining the mobility characteristics that define Drukhari tactical doctrine. Weapons integration has become more sophisticated, with targeting systems that can engage multiple target types simultaneously and ammunition handling that allows rapid switching between different projectile types based on tactical requirements. The development of new cabal formations represents one of the most significant organizational innovations emerging from the current strategic environment. Traditional cabal structures optimized for raiding operations from established Camorra bases have proven less effective for managing extended territorial control in conquered regions, leading to experimentation with new organizational models that can maintain Drukhari operational effectiveness while governing occupied populations and territories. These formations typically combine conventional cabal military capabilities with administrative and governance functions that enable long-term occupation and resource extraction. Vec's long-term strategies for maintaining Drukhari supremacy encompass both defensive measures designed to protect Camorra from emerging threats and offensive initiatives that exploit new opportunities for expansion and resource acquisition. His approach balances the need for immediate responses to current challenges against the requirement for strategic positioning that will provide advantages during future conflicts and crises. The Supreme Overlord's planning extends beyond simple military considerations to encompass political, economic, and technological factors that will determine the long-term viability of Drukhari civilization. The establishment of forward operating bases in newly accessible regions represents a key component of Vect's expansion strategy, providing staging areas for extended operations, while creating buffer zones that protect core Drukhari territories from direct assault. These installations combine military facilities with slave processing centers and resource extraction operations that can support sustained campaigns while generating the psychic energy necessary to maintain their personnel. The most successful forward bases incorporate defensive systems specifically designed to counter the types of threats most likely to emerge in their operational environments, including anti-chaos measures, Tyranid countermeasures, and Imperial detection avoidance systems. The potential for new Cabal formations in conquered territories reflects the changing nature of Drukhari civilization as it adapts to expanded operational scope and territorial control. Traditional Cabals based in Camorra face logistical challenges when attempting to manage distant territories and populations, creating opportunities for new organizations that can provide more effective local governance while maintaining loyalty to the broader Drukhari power structure. These emerging formations typically combine personnel drawn from established Cabals with local recruits who possess specialized knowledge of their regions and populations. The integration of conquered populations into Drukhari military structures represents a significant departure from traditional practices that treated all non-Drukhari as potential slaves or torture subjects. The expanded territorial scope of current operations has created requirements for local knowledge and specialized capabilities that can only be provided by individuals familiar with specific regions and their characteristics. Carefully selected and conditioned local personnel can provide intelligence, logistics support, and specialized services that enhance Drukhari operational effectiveness while reducing the resource requirements for maintaining extended territorial control. The governance models being developed for Drukhari-controlled territories reflect the need to balance resource extraction and population control against the practical requirements of maintaining productive societies that can support extended military operations. These systems typically emphasize efficiency and compliance over the elaborate cruelty that characterizes traditional Drukhari approaches to population management, though they retain sufficient brutality to generate the psychic energy necessary for Drukhari survival. The most successful territorial governance combines systematic exploitation with incentive structures that encourage cooperation and productivity among subject populations. As the galaxy continues to evolve in response to the Great Rift's influence and the countless conflicts that rage across its breadth, the Drukhari stand poised to exploit the chaos and opportunity that such upheaval provides. The Dark City of Camorra, with its labyrinthine politics and sophisticated military capabilities, remains uniquely positioned to thrive in an environment where conventional civilizations struggle merely to survive. The Cabals that emerge successfully from this period of transformation will likely bear little resemblance to their predecessors, having adapted their organizations, tactics, and strategic objectives to meet the demands of a fundamentally altered galactic landscape. The future of the Dark City ultimately depends on the continued ability of its inhabitants to balance their internal competitions and conflicts against the external threats that seek to destroy them entirely. The political genius that has enabled Vect's millennia-long dominance of Camorra will face its greatest test as new challenges emerge that cannot be countered through traditional methods of manipulation and betrayal. Whether the Drukhari can successfully adapt their civilization to meet these challenges while maintaining the essential characteristics that define their culture remains the ultimate question that will determine their continued existence in the dark millennium ahead.